Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Traitor's face in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 41, Gatherings and Scatterings. Angela returned to consciousness, slowly and painfully, to find the Kyoshi warrior girl leaning over her. Her first thought was to go ahead and kill Suki right there for the crime of gazing upon a princess of the Fire Nation without permission, but before she could work up the energy for a good heart-boiling flame, she remembered what had happened. Mai was on Zhao's ship with the Avatar. Angela groaned as it came back, her attempt to kill Mai right there in the ship's corridors, the delicious look of terror in the traitor's eyes, and then the short and soggy battle with the mysterious waterbender who had come out of nowhere to deny Angela her vengeance. Angela squeezed her eyes shut. She had failed. She had failed to kill Mai, and failed to be aware enough of her surroundings to avoid the waterbender's ambush. That he had gone on to beat her unconscious without her being able to so much as attempt a counter-attack spoke to his skill, but he should have never gotten that first shot. Less than perfect was less than acceptable. And Angela had just proven herself less than perfect. She wondered what father would think when he found out, but quickly shut that line of thought down. She needed to be able to function, to make up for her mistake. She couldn't do that while directing her thoughts along such a dangerous road. Angela sat up and opened her eyes again. Suki was crouching nearby, just out of reach. Smart of her. They were in a cell in the ship's brig, just like the one Angela had woken up in after the victory against the ash monster of Ba Sing Se, but before she had been. Why are you here? Suki's gave a one-shoulder shrug. The guards wanted to make sure you were okay after that beating, but didn't care to risk their lives to make sure. I guess I'm considered expendable. And where's Zuko? Still wherever they were taking you both. I haven't been told much. No, Suki wouldn't have been. And Angela herself was now disinvited from whatever this reunion with Uncle was. How convenient that Zuzu was the only one there besides enemies and traitors. Angela was not very familiar with father's brother. He had been away for much of her life, pursuing his campaigns against the tribals. During his visits, he had been a charming and charismatic presence in grandfather's court and quite beloved by mother and Zuko, but father had never seemed pleased with Iroh, so Angela kept her distance even though she liked his jokes. She had been looking forward to Mai's marriage to Lu Tenif just to get a spy close to that branch of the family and see what information came to light. But then Uncle had planted his flag at the North Pole and stayed there for years, eventually cancelling the betrothal. Now he was back, and taking an interest in the matter of the Avatar. Yes, it had been a mistake for Angela to throw herself into an attack on Mai. But a single mistake didn't mean she was going to lose what might be a new war. Not when father's greatest rival was involved. Aang couldn't deny the feeling that he had been in conversations like this before. Monk Gyatso had always had a great sense of humor, along with a really clever mind, and when he got in a mood, he could turn conversation itself into an exciting game. Those times, Aang would never know what Gyatso would say next, what outlandish assertion would come from a seemingly innocuous lead-in. It was lots of fun, especially when one of the stuffy monks like Tashi got roped in. Aang saw it as another sign of Gyatso's specific wisdom of a sense of humor combined with knowing people. Iroh's suggestion, though, left Aang wondering if the old prince might not be all there. If I let Zuko throw me in jail, how am I supposed to convince anyone to launch a coup against the Fire Lord? Next to Aang, Zuko crossed his arms. Good question. Yes, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. The glint in Iroh's eyes was a perfect match for the look Gyatso had whenever he was being clever. He remained sitting, completely comfortable on the giant leaf high in the sky that was his chosen meeting place. I didn't mean that Zuko should throw anyone in a prison. That would indeed be quite unpleasant. I've reviewed the proclamation about your banishment, Zuko, and the terms only say that you need to capture the Avatar and bring him back to the Fire Nation. Avatar Aang, if you surrender to Zuko, just as Zhao did to you, there will be no need for violence or imprisonment. In fact, Zuko can grant your parole so that you will not be uncomfortable. He turned to his nephew and continued, certainly, Zuko, it would be no dishonor to you if, instead of bringing the Avatar back in chains, you arrived in the homeland with him in peace, both of you ready to discuss how the Fire Nation can begin healing the world. Zhao will arrange things, and you both can safely set foot on Fire Nation soil within a week. Aang smiled as the Gyatso-like playfulness of the plan became clear. Yeah, it's all just about words, right? We use the right words and behave, and they won't be able to do anything about it. Zuko made a disgusted sound from the back of his throat. That's foolishness. Do you two really think that word games will stop grandfather from having the Avatar tossed into the Caldera's prison tower? Or that I won't be seen as weak and pathetic for allowing our greatest enemy to wander around free? Yes, nephew, I do. With a grunt, Iroh stood up and walked past both Zuko and Aang near to the edge of the leaf platform. He looked out over the blue sky, the wind tooling some of the stray hairs in his beard. And the reason is politics. That's where the coup comes in. According to my contacts back in the homeland, there is a growing discontent with my father's rule. The military leadership knows about the rampaging spirits in the Earth Kingdom and the platinum weapons that are coming too slowly to deal with the problem. The generals worry that the Fire Lord will blame them for the failures. Aang nodded. He had stopped a team of Fire Nation hunters using platinum weapons to hunt a peaceful spirit. It had been difficult, and it had resulted in the death of Guru Puthik, but even that had taken the Fire Nation 3 train tanks and an elite squad. He was glad his friends had wrecked those tanks. Iroh continued, meanwhile, the governors are resentful of the way my father continues to consolidate power in the capital. They find themselves in competition for less and less influence, and are aware that working together would get them more than fighting each other. Both parties are looking for a chance to stand against the Fire Lord, and will be more than happy to let our ruse play out, especially if the most deadly force in the world is siding with them. Aang kept nodding along until Iroh stopped talking and turned around. Aang waited for the next part, to hear what deadly force he would have to deal with, but instead the old prince just looked at him. Then Aang realized that Zuko was looking at him, too. They were both looking at the Avatar. Wait, me? I'm the deadly force. Iroh chuckled. You are obviously a gentle soul, young Avatar, but news of the South Pole and Crescent Island has traveled far. That didn't stop all the firebenders I've met from trying to roast me. Zuko nodded. I've grown up hearing about how Avatar Roku was weak and a traitor, and the air nomads honorless opportunists who tried to force their weak ways on the rest of the world. What? That's what they say about us? All because we don't want to run around hurting people and taking whatever looks good. Iroh sighed. That's better than what is taught in our schools, that the Fire Nation was forced to strike preemptively to protect ourselves from a rampaging Air Nation army. Aang's stomach started hurting. You teach kids that? No wonder everything is so messed up. Zuko shook his head. I didn't know that about the schools. We're lying to our own children now. Now you see, nephew, why fixing the state of the world is not simply a matter of holding our soldiers to a higher standard. And yes, Avatar Aang, you will need to earn your full rightful authority. But fear is a kind of respect, or close enough for our purposes, and the Fire Nation fears you. If you come in peace, offering both solutions and a strength that can be shared, then you have a chance of convincing the leadership to withdraw their support from Ajalon and transfer it to me. Especially with a victorious prince of the Fire Nation from the Oze faction on your side, and a weapon of the Fire Nation behind you both. Aang thought about it. Iroh made it sound so logical, but he'd have to walk into the Fire Nation and meet with these politicians before he'd know whether it was all true. But if it wasn't, did it matter? Was there any other way for him to start working on the damage that had been done in his 100-year absence? He'd saved the southern waterbenders when he helped rescue Katara, protected a Pixio spirit, found new airbenders, and put a stop to Long Feng's desecrations. Those were all good things, things that improved the world. But was it enough? He couldn't keep protecting all those people while going on to help everyone else. Even the airbender nuns had been hurt again while he was distracted. Aang was ready to agree to Iroh's plan. Then Zuko said, Uncle, are you out of your mind? After his interrogation session with Long Feng, Pakku needed some air. Not that any amount of breathing would make this whole mess of a situation into something acceptable. But at least now Pakku was free to pursue his more personal mission. He made his way out of the brig of Zhao's ship, leaving Kinto to clean up Long Feng's cell. Rather than heading back up to the main deck, where he would almost certainly run into Zhao and those ridiculous sideburns again, Paku instead headed to the rear deck, nodded in acknowledgement to the firebender guard stationed there, and then sent the man into a panic by heaving himself over the rail. As he fell, Paku summoned the waters of the bay to come up and meet him, freezing beneath his feet and turning his fall into a pleasant surfing. He rode the ice board over to the pier, where he came ashore and passed through dock facilities and emerged into a village of tents and skin huts. So this was where the fugitives of the southern tribe were living, eh? It looked like a dump. Torches lit up the darkness, and there were more people about than Paku would have expected this many hours past midnight, considering that there were no waterbenders in the south, but whatever event had been going on seemed to be dying down. Some men were putting away musical instruments and cleaning up the remains of bonfires, while women gathered up the detritus of a feast and the children who had fallen asleep right there on the ground. How rustic. Two figures made their way down the lane towards Paku, attempting to sneak around in that universal way that children thought would render them invisible but did no such thing. Paku didn't have offspring of his own, but he had students, which was almost as bad. As they tried to sneak past him, he stepped into their path. You too. They halted in the light of the torches, stiffening. The taller one was a girl, and having lived under Fire Nation rule for years now, Paku recognized what her pale yellow eyes signified. The shorter one was a boy with skin as light as the knife woman's and hair tied up in something that aspired to be a warrior's wolf tail. Still, whatever their origins, they might be able to answer Paku's question. You too. Maybe you can help me. I'm searching for someone. He looked to the boy. Do you know Kunna? The boy blinked up at him. The girl said, Hello, sir. Are you one of the waterbenders who came from the north on the Fire Nation ship? My name is Sheila, and this is Naklin. Water tribe names. Paku kept his gaze on the boy. Well, child, are you going to answer my question? Do you know Kunna? Did she live at the South Pole? The boy was quiet. Is she still there? Do you talk at all? The girl Sheila said, Who's asking? So this was what the southern tribe was coming to. I am Paku, High Master of the Northern Waterbenders. Are you going to answer my question or do you just like making trouble for your betters? Some of the people are saying you Northerners are traitors for working with the Fire Nation. Sheila gave him a smile that was a little too sweet. Why are you asking about Kunna? Ah, a clever one. Yugo-da, the healing master, was clever, too. Paku didn't much like Yugo-da. Kunna is an old friend of mine. She left the North Pole a long time ago. According to Fire Nation census data, someone by that name was living at the South Pole. I want to see if it's the same Kunna I used to know. He also wanted to verify the data in the Fire Nation's census records, that when the southern tribe were consolidated in the mining ghetto, a Kunna was part of a household with her married offspring and grandchildren. But he was hardly going to tell that to a yellow-eyed, impertinent girl. Sheila tapped her chin as she made a show of thinking. And how do I know Kunna wants you to know about her? Okay, that was it. Listen, you little dash. Sheila. Naklin. It's past your bedtime. Why are you still running around? The children stiffened at the sound of their names, but Paku barely noticed. His joints had locked up, too, upon hearing that voice. It had aged, quite a bit, and it had been something like 60 years since he had last heard it, but there was a core tone and manner of speaking that he would always recognize. After all, he had been in love with that voice. He might still be. An old woman shuffled into the light of the torches, and Paku saw his betrothed for the first time since she ran away from him, 60 years ago. Kunna. Here. Now. She still wore her hair in loops. He stood there, having no idea what to say or what to do, as she sent the children back to her hut. They called her Gran-Gran. The boy and girl ran off, leaving Kunna there alone. With him. She turned in the torchlight and looked at him. Paku. She recognized him. The only thing he could think to do in reply was nod. So. She smiled in that special way of hers, a smile that didn't convey any happiness, but rather proclaimed her defiance in the face of something both exasperating and well within her ability to handle. You found me. Paku nodded. Finally, he thought to say, "How are you?" Well, that was a spectacularly stupid opening. Zuko hadn't meant to shout quite so loud and furiously, but Uncle Iroh barely even blinked as he replied, "You have an objection, nephew." Zuko breathed in and out, trying to find his center, but still ending up feeling a bit cockeyed. How can you expect me to stand next to the Avatar and cheer him on as he talks about deposing grandfather? This is treason. I'll be exiled again. Uncle reached out and put his hands on Zuko's shoulders. It was something he had done before, but back then, Uncle Iroh had to crouch. Now, Zuko had to look down to meet his uncle's gaze. Zuko, I know this might be difficult to accept, but you never should have been exiled in the first place. You acted honorably at Ba Sing Se, and served as well as anyone could be expected in the situation. It is not your fault. Zuko tried to pull away, but Uncle Iroh held firmly onto his shoulders. He didn't even know why he was trying to retreat. After his vision in that ashland, when he walked through a living recollection of his failure at Ba Sing Se and saw what might have been his father deliberately throwing fire at his face, Zuko had finally acknowledged his doubts about the official ruling of accidental friendly fire. But to have Uncle just say it like that. Zuko, the Fire Lord was wrong to banish you. He cast you out when you were at your lowest, knowingly giving you an impossible task as the condition for your return. He should have embraced you after your injury, but instead he considered you a sign of his own failure to raise two victorious children. He blamed you for Oze's failings, which he knew also belonged to him. Yes, it would be treason to work against the man. But if you do not commit treason, you will never be safe under his rule. But father wants me back. Zuko closed his good eye, shutting away the pleading face of his uncle. He even sent Azula to help me, and she has. In her own way. If it wasn't safe for me, why would he? Zuko, for some reason, couldn't find a way to ask the question. Uncle Iroh let go of him. I do not know what my brother has planned. All my contacts claim that Oze has changed since your banishment, keeping to himself in his chambers and acting through a weapon of the Fire Nation to protect his interests. Zhao theorized that Oze was committing treason himself, working with the Fire Nation's enemies, including the Avatar. The Avatar squeaked, "Me." Zuko opened his eye to look at the boy, and found surprise all over his face. But I don't know any of those people. Uncle nodded. It's clearly not true, but Oze's actions were mysterious enough that Zhao was able to convince military high command that it was likely to be true. Zuko, you may have to help overthrow the Fire Lord just to save your father. Zuko had to sit down. He sank roughly to the ground, forgetting that he only had a giant leaf between him and the empty sky until his hands were laying on the waxy surface. How was he supposed to sort this out? He had seen the signs, when Azula rescued him from Zhao's high seas prison, that the Fire Nation was at war with itself, but he had never considered that the problem was so pervasive. Father and uncle might both be separately plotting to bring down grandfather? The military was plotting to bring down father? Zhao could switch sides at will and find power and influence? What had happened to the Fire Nation while he was gone? Or was it always like this, and he had never noticed? Could this be why Mai had betrayed him? She had seen the destructive infighting, and how Zuko had landed at the center of it. Is that why the Avatar, in his youthful innocence, meant more to her? Zuko also recalled how Suki wouldn't let him attack the Avatar, during the rampage of the Ash Monster, because he had failed to see that it wasn't Aang's doing. She had been trying to prevent him from making a mistake, in pursuing the task grandfather had given him, and she had been right. Zuko looked up to his uncle. I'm going to need to convince Azula of this, too. Uncle smiled. Beside him, the Avatar blinked. Does this mean that you're in? You'll help me. Zuko stood up. If you help me end my exile, and give me your word of honor that you will deal fairly with my family and people, then yes, I will help you. Sweet. Uncle raised his arms and put one hand on Zuko's back and the other on the Avatar's. You two will have the opportunity to get to know each other quite well as you work. I think it will be good for you both. Zuko let his silence speak for him. Paku perhaps did not think this all the way through. He knew, when he decided to go looking for Kunna, that the odds of finding her were low. She could have died, with all the troubles down at the South Pole, and even if she hadn't, only a small portion of the southern tribe had escaped from the Fire Nation to be here with the Earth Rebels. He had expected to merely find news of Kunna, or something more like rumors. Now he was walking beside her in the moonlight. Or the reflection of the moonlight in a filthy cave. The southern ways were agreeable, she was saying, finishing the tale of her journey down from the North Pole, and so I decided to stay. It was a familiar life, but I had more freedom than I ever would have back home. Paku could only nod. And that freedom was to choose your own marriage. 60 years ago, he had decided that Kunna was the woman he wanted as his wife. Their friendship had made it seem a natural choice, he had thought, and so put in his request to the council and their families, and began carving the betrothal necklace. In retrospect, he supposed he should have asked her, first. Or at some point. Any point. Definitely before she left. Kunna said, I made friends with a waterbender woman, too. A warrior. The first of many friends. People down there were more interesting, I suppose. Happier. They didn't just live life in stolen moments. Before Iroh had come along, Paku doubted that he would have understood that. Now, he was all too familiar with it. He did his duty, lived the life that was assigned to him, for a greater good that was sometimes hard to see. Years ago, he might have been offended by that waterbender warrior woman who befriended Kunna. Now, he envied her. Still, Paku was man enough to not want to talk about it. And that Sheila? She is your granddaughter. Kunna glanced at him, a small smile on her lips. Not by blood, no. But I take care of her, and she has learned some things from me. How to talk to arrogant old men, for one. Paku laughed. I should have known. I do have a blood granddaughter, though. She's a waterbender. She was taken from us, as a child. The rest of my family was killed, and I was left only with my sad little grandson. But he tracked his sister down, dragging the Avatar along with him, and saved her. All of this leaving the tribe, settling here with the Earth King girl came from my grandchildren's actions. Kunna stopped beside a hut, where a girl in pink was standing on her hands beside curtain-covered entrance in what seemed to be some kind of meditation. Katara, my granddaughter, is inside. She fought in the battle today, and has not come out since she woke up. I think the battle wearied her of life. More damage by the Fire Nation. True, it was that degenerate Longfang who had summoned the monster, but it always came back to the Fire Nation. The Firebenders had burned down Ba Sing Se, and the Firebenders had taken this Katara from her home in the first place. But trying to trace the fault back too far could be dangerous. Paku had been the one to drive Kunna away, long before the Fire Nation had done any of that. Kunna was saying, I must remain here in case she comes out. I only left to find the other children. I'm sorry, Paku, that I can't spend more time with you, but I need to dash. Perhaps I can help, he found himself saying. I have been training waterbender warriors for decades, and fought the Fire Nation before they hammered us down. I know a little something about warriors who grow weary of life. I expect there's little difference whether the warrior is a man or a woman. Kunna just blinked at him. He said, with your permission, of course. She gave a slow nod. While the girl in pink righted herself and watched, Paku went over to the hut's entrance and kneeled front of the curtained entrance. Hello, Katara. I am Paku, the high waterbending master of the northern tribe. It is my honor to meet you. I think I might be able to offer you some helpful knowledge. Do you know the refreshing drink, meditation? He waited. Eventually, a voice from within the hut, the voice of a girl who couldn't have even been as old as Princess Yu, responded with a, no. Well, then, would you like to learn? I can teach it from right out here. Okay. Excellent. The refreshing drink is a way of centering the mind that restores the part of our spirit that has been strained by the trials of life. We begin, as with all meditations, with the proper breathing. Mai missed the moment when Aang and Zuko both returned to the material world. She had been too worried about them to be bored, but she was still left with nothing to do while watching over their bodies, so she wound up pacing the fire-lit room's perimeter, thinking about what would happen to her if the colonial continent was handed over to King Toph. Would Mai stay in exile? Would she be expected to return? What did post-war life look like for an avatar, anyway? Lost in thought, she had no idea that the boys had woken up until Aang suddenly said, "Wow." Fortunately, no one saw her startle at the noise. Angela must have left her jumpy. "Are you both okay?" Zuko said nothing. Aang, though, grinned at her like Tom Tom did the time he figured out how to get the lid off the cookie jar open by himself. "I'm better than okay. Prince Iroh figured it all out for us. With his help, we're really going to do it. We're going to go to the Fire Nation, all together, and make him a good Fire Lord who will help us fix everything." Mai looked at Zuko. He nodded, although he wouldn't meet her gaze with his good eye. Mai wasn't quite sure how to react. Go back to the Fire Nation and dive straight into a succession struggle? Well, whatever it was, it certainly wouldn't be boring. As she considered this new information, she knocked on the chamber's door to summon a guard. The armored firebenders led them back through the corridors of the ship up to the main deck. Of course, Zhao was waiting for them. "Avatar, Prince Zuko, I hope your meeting with Prince Iroh was productive." Aang was about to pipe up again, but Mai cut him off with, "The Avatar has been given things to think about. We'll be taking our leave, now." Zhao shrugged in his armor. "Of course, you need to discuss the matter with your rebel allies. Take as long as you need. I have orders to wait until your party is healed and rested to take you back to the Fire Nation. It will take some weeks to fully arrange your homecoming, anyway." Aang took a step back, bringing him so close to Mai that they were almost touching. "You're coming with us." "Of course. Prince Iroh has tasked me with guarding and transporting you for the duration of your time in the homeland. I will also be able to serve as your military consultant, if your pet weapon isn't up to the task." Well, this deal just got better all the time, didn't it? Zhao turned to Zuko. "As for you, Your Highness, your safety is still at risk around these rebels. I'll have you taken back to your sister and servant girl. Perhaps we can find some nicer accommodations than those cells, now that we've all on the same side." Zuko glared, but followed as one of the guards led him away. As Mai and Aang fell in behind their own escort, she leaned forward and whispered to him, "Are you sure about all of this? That we can trust Iroh if he's using people like Zhao?" Aang looked at her out of the corner of his eye. "His plan sounds better than I could have ever hoped for." Even Zuko agreed. And Iroh seemed like such a nice guy. Very wise. He reminded me of Monk Gyatso. I think we can trust him. Mai thought back to her own family's dealing with Iroh. I had a betrothal agreement with his son, and he didn't have a problem breaking it. But he said his son was sick. That's part of why he wants to help me save the Fire Nation. Well, Mai said as they left their guards behind and stepped off the gangplank, watching their friends rush over to them, just remember that people can change their minds. But then, wasn't she the ultimate reminder of that? Katara had been alone in the dark. Now, she was alone in her very own river. She was deep in this Master Pakku's meditation, having followed his words to a place of peace. The first time she had reached it, she had been so surprised that she lost her tranquility and had to start over. It wasn't that she had never felt such peace before, she had touched it every time she used healing to help her friends, taking the essence of their chi and strengthening it to fix wounds and troubled minds. She realized now that those experiences had been a shadow of something else, the sensation of healing her own troubles, deep within herself. And it had all been done without water. It turned out that the true water, the spirit of water, was inside of her heart and veins and mind and body. Master Hamma had taught her of the water that existed throughout the external world, even the air, but Master Pakku had showed her that water existed beyond the world as well. This was the true path to mastery, she could feel. It was like the firebender girl had said, during the fight on the cargo ship, "You're as much a stranger to your element as you are to the sky." Katara had trained in a cage in a place where water couldn't exist. She had copied the movements of a master who could only rely on the memory of being a waterbender. But this meditation had found a place where she and water were one, a place every bit as large as the sky, but providing strength instead of fear. Katara opened her eyes and stood up in the dark hut. It was time to leave. She emerged from the darkness of the hut and out in the light of stars and torches. Tai Li was there, squealing with pleasure and bouncing on her feet. Gran Gran was there, too, looking at Katara with warm eyes straight out of the memories that provided strength in the heart of Crescent Island. Standing beside Gran Gran were two adorable children who looked at Katara like she was the moon spirit itself stepping down from the sky. And in the center of them all was an old man who could only be Pakku. Katara bowed low. "Thank you." Pakku acknowledged her with a nod. "It's my pleasure to assist anyone who fought against that abomination today. That Long Feng has only started getting what he deserves." Katara decided to push past that point. "You're obviously a great waterbending master." "Yes, well, I dash. What else can you teach me?" Pakku blinked. "Teach you? But I've only taught men, but I'm leaving tomorrow on another errand for Prince Iroh." Katara looked at Tai Li, and saw nothing but unconditional support. She looked to Gran Gran, who gave a nod and a smile that Katara recognized from looking at her own reflection in water. She looked back to Pakku and said, "I can work with that." Aang finished his explanation with, "And so as soon as Zuko's capture of me is acknowledged, we'll go to the Fire Nation to confirm it, and then we'll just start subverting the government and deposing the Fire Lord and stuff. Once that's done, Iroh will do everything he's promised." No one spoke. Aang looked around the little space, which he had been told used to be a filing office back when Full Moon Bay was working ferry service. Now, it was Earth King Topha's throne room, and she was holding court from atop a crate with the sigil of the Earth Kingdom painted on it. Around her, torches illuminated the faces of the other rebels she had gathered, including Jet, who apparently was not only alive, but working for King Toph. Sokka had sympathized with Aang's surprise. Sokka, his old friend Bato, and several other Water Tribe men were also present. None of them looked particularly pleased. Mai stood at Aang's side, silent but steady. He was really glad she was here. Finally, Jet snorted. "You really believe all that mud, don't you?" "He does." King Toph patted her feet against the ground. Jet stepped forward into the center of the court, just out of reach of Aang. "This is obviously a trap. Surrounding the Avatar with the enemy is dangerous enough, but then sending the group straight into the Fire Nation? This Prince Iroh clearly doesn't think too much of our intelligence." Aang shook his head. "But he's wise enough to travel to the spirit world, and Mai confirmed that he's been considered a problem in the Fire Nation for years now. If it's a trap, he would have had to be planning it since before I returned." Bato said, "Or he could simply be clever enough to make use of the situation at hand. I understand everyone's caution, but come on, can we just walk away from this?" Aang stepped forward so that he was standing ahead of Jet and held his staff out so that everyone could see the air nomad craftsmanship. He was so glad to have it back, like a piece of him had been restored to life. "I didn't agree to put myself completely in danger. Zhao's just our escort, so I'm not going to be traveling in a jail or anything. And even in the Fire Nation itself, I can fly away whenever I want on Appa and be back in the Earth Kingdom in a day. Yeah, it's probably really dangerous, but what's our other option? Say no thanks and then keep on fighting a war that was already lost." Sokka nodded. "This is crazy and stupid and probably a trap, but on the other hand, things have been crazy and stupid since Aang showed up. And I don't trust Aang to know when to cut the fishing line on this, but if I go with him, I can keep an eye out and be the practical part of the group." "Excuse me." Mike worked an eyebrow and put a hand on her hip. "You're the practical one. And Mai can check my work because she's practical, too," Sokka amended. "I think it's worth a shot, because otherwise I'm all out of ideas about how to liberate the rest of the Southern Water Tribe and stuff. And I'm not too proud to admit that I'm curious about what's going on here. I only got a glimpse when I was Zhao's prisoner in Tiankeng, but the Fire Nation does seem to have some internal factions slapping at each other. Even if we just walk away with a better look at that, it's probably worth giving things a shot." Aang couldn't stop from grinning. He had expected Sokka to be a lot more negative about this. Getting the other boys' support meant a lot. Mai and Sokka both were back to helping Aang together, and it felt like coming home again. King Toph stood up from her crate throne. "No matter what, this whole thing has put a serious crimp in my style. I had this whole hidden base and a sweet rebellion going on, but now there's a Fire Nation warship in my bay and apparently some Prince Admiral at the top of the world knows all about it. Aang noticed Jet's gaze go down to his feet. Toph inclined her head towards Jet for a moment, and then straightened and put her hands on her hips. It sounds like the Avatar is going to do this. I don't know about Master and Lady Practicality over there, but I do know I can tell when anyone is lying. Plus, if this Prince Iroh really is playing by the rules, then the Earth King should definitely be a part of whatever talking is going to happen. I need to make sure that the Earth Kingdom is liberated in my name, after all. So while the rest of you set up a new base and get ready to make life hard for Fire Nation occupiers again, I'll go along on the Avatar's field trip and add my own considerable wisdom and general greatness to the proceedings. Jet gaped at her. You're seriously going to go along with this? Just like that. Yup, just like that. Aang laughed as Toph grinned in Jet's general direction. Besides, I fought alongside that Prince Zuko guy out there against the Ash Monster. I like the tempo of his heart. As long as he's involved, I think keeping my feet on him will be very educational. Mai snorted. I'm sure Zuko will love that. See, Lady Caldera Umai knows that's up. So, anyone have anything smart to say before I get stubborn about this? The Earth rebels except for Jet all fell to their knees and began bowing to their king. Jet let his shoulders slump and didn't say anything. Aang looked over at the Water Tribe group, and caught Bato and Sokka exchanging glances. Finally, Bato said, then the Southern Water Tribe will support the Avatar, as well. Perhaps by working with Iroh we will learn more about our brothers in the north. Of course, we'll need to get Kunna's approval as well. Sokka groaned. I'm the only delegate person here who has to get permission from his gran, aren't I? Aang walked over and put an arm around Sokka's shoulders. Don't worry. Zuko needs to get his little sister's permission before he can do anything. Zuko had finished his account of the meeting with Uncle several minutes ago. Azula still hadn't said anything. They, along with Suki, were in a cabin now, having been let out of the brig by Zhao. It wasn't a very large room and had no furnishings, but it offered more space than a cell and certainly smelled better. Zuko and Azula were kneeling in the cabin's center, while Suki leaned next to the door, almost as if she was serving as a guard. Zuko leaned forward. Azula I'll have to go along with whoever Zhao is sending to make the report, of course, she interrupted. She stood up, turned to face on the blank walls, and tapped her chin. I'll verify that everything is correct, and then go on ahead of you to give a direct explanation to Father. Before I leave, I'll need the full itinerary for you and the Avatar. That way, I'll know where I can meet you even if we aren't able to get in contact with you again. Zuko blinked. Wait, you're just going along with this? No arguments? No calling me stupid for trusting Uncle? Azula turned to regard him with something like surprise. What good would that do? Whatever game Uncle is playing, this will still get us what we want. Father sent me to help end your banishment and bring you back, and this will accomplish that. The very first step of this plan accomplishes it, and then it doesn't matter what else happens. Suki said, so you trust Zhao to ferry your brother to victory? Azula's lip curved into a smile. Good question, but yes, I do. According to the reports from home, Zhao was very much in disgrace in the aftermath of our little jailbreak. Finding haven in Uncle's service accounts for how he still lives, and he won't jeopardize that. He'll have no friends left if he does. As for Zhao's competence, well, that's why I'm going along to make sure the report of Zuzu's triumph is filed correctly. Zuko let out a heavy breath. It was a relief not to have to argue with Azula. Even when he was right, he tended to lose debates with her, although some of that was due to her resorting to physical violence when she couldn't otherwise convince him. It also made him feel better about the whole situation, but he still felt compelled to ask, and what about deposing grandfather and giving back the Earth Kingdom? You will accept that? The look Azula gave him was void of expression. That's why I need to talk with father as soon as possible. Grandfather is a weak old fool who is clinging to power only because no one has tried to take it from him. And as for the colonial continent, I've had unpleasant encounters with 2 of the Ashlands. If the whole place is descending into ruin, better to cut our losses after we've taken everything of value. But father will know best about it. I will explain everything to him, and then do what he commands. I always do everything that he commands. Zuko frowned at her words. So he was really going back to the Fire Nation. His banishment was really coming to an end. He would have to face father, have to find out the truth of what happened between them at Ba Sing Se. And in doing so, he might find himself in the middle of a war between all the factions of the royal family. Zuko had come to hate the whole concept of factions. Still, he stood up and said, "Thank you, Azula. We don't always get along, but without your help I never would have gotten back home." She eyed him as if he was speaking a foreign language, and then turned to point to Suki. "You." Suki blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you. While I'm gone, Zuzu is your responsibility. I don't expect any trouble, but I'm giving you the task of doing whatever is necessary to get Zuko back to the Fire Nation in accordance with Uncle's plan. Hurt who must, destroy who you must, and give Zuzu all the hugs he needs to keep his spirits up long enough to finish this task. You will also guard him alone back in the homeland. Don't trust any other security, unless I provide introductions. If anything goes wrong, I will personally burn your sister alive over the course of a full day, and then I will make it my whole purpose in life to hunt you down and do the same to you. Are we clear?" Suki actually bowed. "Always." Zuko couldn't believe this. No, wait, he could. His sister's default attitude was a mix of patronizing and threatening. "Azula, you're repeating yourself. Suki has served us loyally, and will hardly do anything to endanger the chance to free her homeland." The smile Suki turned on him was positively brilliant. "Thanks, Zuko." "Oh, you're welcome." Azula threw her hands up in the air and rolled her eyes. "Yes, fine, being nice to the servants is a wonderful thing. You two can keep grinning at each other if you want, but I'm retiring for the night. I have much to plan before Zhao sends out the runners with his report in the morning, and I would like to think I'm entitled to a few hours of healthy sleep before the sun rises." She went over to the door and grabbed the handle, but then hesitated for a moment. "I also need to figure out how to kill Mai somewhere in all of this." Before Zuko could respond, his sister wrenched the door open and walked out. Sokka was the only member of the group who hadn't enjoyed a spirit energy explosion-induced nap the day before, but he nevertheless got himself up at dawn to watch Aang formally surrender himself to Prince Zuko. They did it on the pier beside Zhao's ship, in the dim light of the morning sun filtered down through the hole in the cavern's ceiling. As soon as the formal words were spoken, Sokka didn't really listen to them. Zhao sent a signal to one of the ships in his task force to start the journey to the nearest Fire Nation dispatch outpost. There, it would be reported that Prince Zuko had fulfilled the terms of his banishment and was bringing the Avatar back to the Fire Nation. Sokka fought back a yawn. Nothing to do now but let his broken rib heal and get ready to march right into the nest of the worst predators the world had ever produced. Maybe he'd go back to bed and get in a few hours of sleep. He needed his rest, after all, if his rib was going to mend itself back together. He ambled back into the middle pole, enjoying the sight of his people starting their day with all the chores they used to do before the Fire Nation forced them into that ghetto. And as he came up on a particular tent, he saw Katara and Ty Lee stretching in the glow of the morning sun. "Katara! You're okay." She looked over at his exclamation, and smiled as he ran over and wrapped her in a gentle, so as not to irritate his broken rib, hug. The squeeze she gave him back was both strong and also mindful of his injury, just as a little sister's hug should be. He put a hand on her head and said, "I knew you wouldn't down for long. You're stronger than any stupid city-sized abomination of unlife." "Thanks, Sokka. I can tell you really mean that." Katara let go of him, and threw a glance at her stretching partner. "Ty Lee, could you give us a minute?" "Sure. Thanks." Katara linked her arm into Sokka's and began leading him down the lane. "I can't take all the credit for myself. Ty Lee gave me a talk that really helped. And then Master Pakka came." Sokka didn't like the sound of that. "Yeah, I recognize the name. He saved Mai from that Princess Azula, but he's one of the northern waterbenders who came with Zhao? Did you find out what their deal was?" Katara shook her head. "We didn't talk about it. I just know that Master Pakka was an old friend of Gran Gran's, before she left the Northern Water Tribe. What? Gran wasn't born in the south? I didn't know that. So we're half Northern. Or, wait, a quarter Northern. Does this mean we don't get to go ice dodging someday? Focus, Sokka. The point is that Master Pakku taught me a waterbender meditation that really helped me. Master Hamma was a good teacher, but Pakku showed how water is reflected in life and dash. Sokka stopped following her for a while after that, as she went into her waterbending mumbo-jumbo. He knew there was something to it, especially if Pakku was good enough to impress even Mai with his fighting, but it wasn't anything he ever expected to understand, or even work on him. There were lots of tricks for focusing the mind, and what Katara was talking about was the kind of thing for less rational thought processes. When she finished, he said, "So you picked up a few tricks, then? That's good. That will help when we go with Aang. I have a feeling we're going to need every trick in the book, and a few others that the guys who wrote the books left out so that they'd have some surprises for all the people who read the books." Katara was conspicuously quiet. They came to the end of the village, and she stopped walking and turned so that she was facing Sokka directly. "I'm not going to the Fire Nation with you guys." Sokka wasn't even disappointed. "I understand. It's going to be dangerous, and honestly, I think it's good if you stay with Gran and help with the relocation. King Toph says she has some backup ideas for new hideouts, and dash. No, I mean there's something else I need to do. Gran and I convinced Pakku to take me with him when he leaves, so that he can train me." Sokka saw the hard look in his sister's eyes, and so clamped down on the outraged cry he wanted to unleash. "Okay, so, have you thought this through? Those guys are working for the Fire Nation dash. For the same prince who Aang is making a deal with to end the war. And we don't really know anything about what's going on at the North Pole dash. And this will be a good way to find out. And this could be very dangerous dash. So is marching into the Fire Nation to overthrow the Fire Lord. And I don't like the idea of you being all by yourself with no backup." Katara opened her mouth to retort, but then closed it again, finally yielding to Sokka's wisdom. And then Ty Lee's voice came out of nowhere with, "I can go with her." Sokka spun to find the Fire Nation acrobat standing behind him. Katara groaned. "I said I needed a minute with my brother." "Yeah, and we took a break from stretching for a minute so you two could talk." Ty Lee frowned. "Wait, did you mean you wanted a minute alone?" "Sorry. But anyway, I can come with you on your training mission and look out for you." Sokka shook his head. "But Maya was expecting you to go to the Fire Nation with her." Ty Lee practically wilted. "Yeah, I heard about that thing with Azula on Zhao's ship. Azula doesn't know I'm alive, and as much as I want to support Mai, I think it's better for both of us if Azula doesn't find out about me." Katara grabbed Sokka's right hand in her both of hers. "It's not a bad idea. I want to go train so that I can help you guys. I can't be everything you need if I'm not a proper waterbender, but I think Pakku can help that. When I'm ready to come back and help, Ty Lee the dangerous weapon of the Fire Nation will be there with me, right?" "Right. I love coming back and helping people." Ty Lee grabbed Sokka's other hand in hers and held up near her heart. Sokka shut his eyes against the twin pairs of glistening eyes beseeching him. He hated it when people had rational answers to his objections, and the fact that Ty Lee was one of the deadliest warriors in the world didn't exactly leave him much of an argument to stand on. "The group is breaking up, isn't it?" "Only for a little bit," Katara said. "We're not losing each other again. We're just going where we need to." Sokka sighed. "Ty Lee, could let go of my hand, please?" "Oh, sure." Freed, Sokka pulled his sister in for another hug. "Show them how strong we are in the south, okay? Only if you show the Fire Nation how strong the rest of the world is." "Of course." Sokka could only hope that the demonstration wouldn't come from the Fire Nation figuring out what it took to finally destroy all of its enemies once and for all. But then, he liked to consider all the possibilities. Chapter 42, Homecoming. Mai had abandoned the color red, had forsaken status and power and infighting and boredom and the life she had known. She had become what her friends, what Aang, and Sokka and Katara, wanted her to be. She had tried to transform into someone they could like, because she had chosen to make them her whole world. She should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Mai had spent much of the voyage to the Fire Nation in her cabin, of course, letting the thrum of the ship's engine ward against seasickness. It was a much better voyage than her last, but then, this time she wasn't planning on betraying anyone when she got to her destination. Also, there was no jet to attack, accuse, and generally harass her. That was doing wonders for her stomach, it turned out. On the other hand, the fact that Jet had disappeared sometime during the preparations for the journey to the Fire Nation probably wasn't a good sign. Aang had officially surrendered to Zuko and accepted Iroha's plan weeks ago, prompting a flurry of activity for everyone as they prepared to subvert the government of the most powerful nation on the planet and also guard against possible betrayal. King Toph had overseen the relocation of her rebellion to somewhere that Iroha, hopefully, wouldn't know about. In her spare time, Toph also tried to assemble a properly kingly wardrobe so that she would actually look like royalty when she arrived in the Fire Nation. Mai, naturally, got hijacked into helping with that and wound up giving up most of her own current wardrobe, or at least the nicer bits, to turn into green robes and capes that would flow over the smaller girl. It might not have passed as the height of fashion in Ba Sing Se, but the city was now ash, and anyway Toph liked keeping a bit of roughness in her look. Mai, for her own part, had been gifted with a brand new wardrobe of red and black silks, along with a fresh supply of the finest Yudao blades, by Prince Iroh care of Commander Zhao. The explanation for the gift was that she needed to look like a true weapon of the Fire Nation when standing at Aang's side, and she knew it was true. When she was alone, she sometimes ran a hand over the new clothes and just looked at them. She had been wearing green since she betrayed Zuko and sided with Aang on Crescent Island. Was the restoration of her old colors just artifice, or symbolic of something within her? Thinking about such a stupid thing distracted her from her seasickness, in any event. With her arrival in the Fire Nation imminent, it was time to once again embrace the colors of blood and night. She started with the blades, of course, strapping a full set to her skin. She didn't know if it was any more likely for a betrayal to happen today than other time, but polite society in the Fire Nation expected warriors to be fully armed, so it was a fashionable as well as practical choice. Then came the clothes, fine silks that would be more breathable in the Fire Nation's heat and humidity than the more roughly spun clothes of the Earth Kingdom peasantry. As she dressed, Mai couldn't help brushing her fingers over the burn scar on the right side of her abdomen, a little reminder of what she had been, what she chose to become, and that Zhao packed a mean fireball. Then, for the first time since the discovery of the new airbenders, Mai also chose to do her hair up in her old style, with the twin tails and oxhorn buns. As she worked, though, she realized that she had let her hair grow longer than usual. Trimming it wouldn't be hard for her, not even with a razor disc in her offhand, but she hesitated. Maybe it was time to do something a bit more grown-up. Mai repurposed a few of her needles, using them to create an intricate bun that hung tightly from the back of her head. A waterfall of hair was left to hang from the bun down to the middle of her back. In front, she braided a series of thin tails to frame her face in wisps that would catch the wind. One loose swatch of hair was left to hang down the middle as though it had escaped its original place, as diagonal and sharp as an assassin's knife, stopping just short of her eyes for what she hoped would be a dangerous look. Mai couldn't help but wonder what her mother would think, if mother was even still alive. Well, time to find out. Moving slowly so as not to risk her stomach with the ship's bobbing, she made her way up to the main deck. Mai had forgotten the name of the scrounged vessel that was taking her back home. No one had wanted to sail with Zhao, but Toph had a solution. The Southern Water Tribe refugees had escaped the South Pole in a cargo ship stolen from the Fire Nation, and they had managed to crew it far enough to get to the Earth Kingdom. Bato eventually found a not entirely legitimate merchant who could use such a thing, and so a trade was made for something smaller and more innocuous. Mai had recognized it as a kind of civilian steamer designed in the Earth Kingdom. The Water Tribe refugees still had the ship when they joined up with Topha's group, and the self-proclaimed Earth King had hidden it near Full Moon Bay for future use. Mai had to admit that it made for nicer travel than a Fire Nation warship. Not as much rusty metal, for one. She emerged onto the main deck into the light of the sun and immediately had to stop, shut her eyes, and grip the nearest railing while the ship bobbed on that stupid, annoying ocean someone had decided to put between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom. When she decided that she wasn't going to throw up, she opened her eyes again and found her friends gathered up at the ship's prow. The most noticeable, of course, was Appa. The sky bison lowed happily when he saw her, and Mai gave the big guy an acknowledging wave. She hadn't seen him much over the course of the voyage, having spent most of it in her cabin cursing the tides. He seemed in good health and spirits now, but he still hadn't flown since the battle against the ash monster at Ba Sing Se. Aang had thought it best to let Appa rest, after all the exertion of that event. Mai had been told that the big guy was struck by Azula's lightning, just she had needed his help to save Aang from the ash monster, and so after a quick round of bison-sized acupuncture they had flown to the rescue. It had been a terrible strain on Appa, and even a parting healing session from Katara had merely gotten the bison on track to healing, not fully fixed his internal energies. Hopefully, they wouldn't need a quick escape from a Fire Nation ambush anytime soon. Mai stopped just short of the reach of Appa's tongue, and realized that her other friends were unusually silent. She turned to find Aang staring at her with his jaw hanging open. You okay?" Aang's face went red and he snapped his mouth shut. Sokka was smirking at Aang, but Mai noticed that his eyes kept snapping over to her face. "So, you dolled yourself up for the homecoming." "Oh, this." Mai brushed at the fringe of hair over her eyes and shook her head so that the tails would float on the breeze. Aang cleared his throat and even Sokka watched her carefully. So this was what it was like to be Ty Lee. "If I'm going to be executed for treason, it won't be while I'm looking like an elephant rat fresh from the gutter. What do you think, Aang?" It was a little mean, she knew, but his face was so red. Besides, he probably needed to learn not to get flustered like this if he was going to convince the Fire Nation to overthrow its lord. "You're amazing," Aang breathed, and Mai felt her own cheeks warm. There was no denying that he meant it, not with so much feeling in his voice. She had expected him to stammer and say something about her looking nice. Someday she'd have to look into how to deal with this genuine emotion business. For his part, Aang was no slouch, either. Instead of his usual air nomad duds, he was resplendent in a golden robe, another piece supplied by Prince Iroh. She looked Aang up and down, confirming that he wasn't rumpled at all for his big Fire Nation debut, and said, "Thanks." Determined to win this exchange, she reached out and brushed the fingers of her right hand over his smooth, shaved head. "You're looking pretty grown up, yourself." Aang's back went rigid, and Sokka laughed. It was fun being Ty Lee. Mai would have to try it more often, if she survived the day's events. A quick glance confirmed that Sokka hadn't managed to wrinkle his new clothes yet. His tribe mates in Full Moon Bay had joined together and worked hard to sew him a wardrobe fit for an ambassador before they had to leave, and hadn't done a bad job, if you liked blue and beads. At least they hadn't given him anything with fur to wear in the Fire Nation heat. Together, the three of them were very pretty revolutionaries, all dressed up and ready to overthrow a tyrant. That's when Momo came in for a landing on the front of Mai's robes and stuck one of her hair tails in his mouth. "Momo, no, that's not food." At least it got Aang laughing. They watched from the prow as their ship approached Zenmatsu Island. Zhao's flagship was visible ahead of them, and Mai's sharp eyes detected another pair of observers on that deck. It was hard to tell, but judging from the heights, it might have been a certain Fire Prince and his bodyguard. Zuko couldn't take his good eye off the sight of Zenmatsu Island steadily growing larger on the horizon, even when Suki came up to join him on the deck. "I'm finally going home." Only Suki could have understood what he was really saying. She put a hand on his shoulder, drawing his gaze, and said, "Are you feeling up to this?" She had no official status, despite serving as his bodyguard, and so was given a uniform to forestall any questions. She had passed on a full set of armor, instead taking the guise of a Marine Light Scout, although without any insignia of rank or allegiance. Her auburn hair was a good complement to the dark reds of the uniform, but her blue eyes were a startling contrast. "I can sneak into the engine room and sabotage something if you want some more time." She was probably joking, but Zuko was still tempted to take her up on the offer. There hadn't been time for worrying up to now. Things had been so busy since he captured the Avatar. Zhao had provided, with Uncle's supervision, everything Zuko had needed, including a new set of royal gold-trimmed armor, but that didn't make it a trustworthy situation. Zuko had double-checked everything, even the clothes. He wouldn't put it past Zhao to order a thread pulled so that he lost a sleeve at a critical moment. He had also redoubled his training, having put aside his routine during the height of the Avatar chase. Zuko was acting paranoid, yes, but the was sure Azula would approve. He was being sent to help overthrow the Fire Lord, to work against his own family. That danger alone merited the most extreme caution, never mind what it said about the nature of the Fire Nation itself. If even Zuko could be turned against his own grandfather, who could be turned against Zuko? But training was all his efforts had proved to be so far. There had been no double cross, and now he was about to return to the Fire Nation once again. Zhao hadn't started the voyage until confirmation of his report about the Avatar's surrender was transmitted and provisional permission was given for Zuko to bring the prize back for verification. That permission was enough for the blockade around Fire Nation waters, still in place since Crescent Island's destruction, to permit Zuko entry. Now it was time to see what the reaction would be on the soil of the Fire Nation itself. As Zuko stared at the island, now so close, he heard footsteps on the deck behind him. "It won't be long now, Prince Zuko," Zhao's voice came. "The dock we'll be using belongs to the local governor. There's a navy base on this island as well, meant to resupply any of our ships that just made the crossing from the colonial continent, along with quite a few civilian ports, but we've been directed to bypass all of that. We're to be received in style, it seems." Zuko wondered if that was meant to be a warning of some kind. Zenmatsu Island was one of the most eastern of the inhabited outer islands that formed the tail of the chain trailing capital island. He didn't know the governor or even much about the island other than its place on a map. He presumed that it contained mostly peasantry and the kind of light industry they were responsible for operating across the Fire Nation. Maybe it was simply the governor's duty by default to confirm Zuko's capture of the Avatar. "Don't worry," Zhao said as he turned and marched back towards the command tower. "I plan to satisfy your esteemed uncle, and that means keeping you alive. See that it does, Zhao." But of course the man wasn't listening. Suki poked Zuko in the side. "I'll be looking out for you, too. Just remember, you have to get through this to get what you really want. And you can do it." It was a good reminder. Yes, Zuko wanted to go home again, to once again live in the heat of the sunlight in the Fire Nation, but that wasn't what had kept him alive through those years of crawling across the Earth Kingdom. Home wasn't just the Fire Nation. It was the capital, and the palace. It was the people who had once been his family. It was Father. Would Father be there, waiting for Zuko's arrival? Zuko remained at the prow as the ship came in close to Zenmatsu Island, Suki at his side. It seemed to be a large, lush island from the view of its coasts, although more given to cliffs than beaches. Several large, solitary peaks rose up in the distance, emerging from what seemed to be tropical forests that sprawled over changing elevations. He watched as they passed the Navy base, as well as the civilian ports that seemed to give life to lively settlements. He didn't see any of the smoke that usually heralded the larger factories, so perhaps this was a more rural island. However, there was nothing rural about their destination right now. The governor's mansion was built to overlook the island's largest port city. A larger bay was given over to public docks, but the mansion itself was set on a smaller, artificially round bay where a private port was kept behind a manned gate. Zuko was able to observe it all up close as Zhao's ship steamed into the larger bay and then kept going into the smaller one as the gate opened before them. When a tug came out to pull the ship up to the governor's dock, Zuko finally left his place and got ready to disembark. He supposed it must have taken some time for it all to happen, with the Avatar's ship having to be tugged into place as well, but time didn't seem to gain a hold on him. He thought about all the fanfare that had been assembled when he left to lay siege to Ba Sing Se, and how it had been a bright and humid day just like this one. He made himself go through a breathing exercise, but was startled out of it when Suki grabbed his right hand in both of hers. "This is real," she said. Her blue eyes were intense as she commanded his one-eyed gaze. "You're coming home because you were strong and wise enough to make it happen. None of this would have happened if you hadn't survived things that would have killed most people, and made the right choices when it really mattered." Well, he supposed that was one way to look at it. A way he liked, to be honest. He kept that in mind as a wind brought the Avatar flying over on his glider. Aang landed beside Zuko and smoothed his golden robes. "Ready?" Zuko nodded. He put his hands on the avatar's shoulders, and guided the boy down the gangplank. And, in doing so, he set foot back in the Fire Nation proper, not an outpost or prison but a real island where people lived for the first time in years. Perhaps he imagined the jolt of energy that ran up through his body as soon as his foot came down on the platform, a jolt that fed his inner fire and made his blood sing in his veins. It was only when the jolt faded that Zuko could focus his eyes on the gathering in front of him, of the men and women wearing fine robes, of the soldiers standing in honor formation around the gathering. One old man stepped forward. "Prince Zuko, have you brought the avatar to us, by your own hand?" Zuko squared his shoulders, feeling the weight of the armor on his body. "I have." The old man looked to Aang. "That's me." The kid raised a hand and waved, giving life to a breeze that tousled the old man's beard. The man did not react. He looked back to Zuko and bowed at the waist. "Then, as was appointed to me by order of the Fire Lord, I officially confirm the fulfillment of the terms of your banishment. Welcome home, Your Highness." Zuko had to shut his eye, lest the tears escape. Oh. Aang didn't realize Zuko was going to cry. To deflect attention away from the prince, he said to the straightening old man, "So, I'm Aang. Pleased to meet you. Likewise, Avatar. I am Lord Zhao, the facilitator for this little gathering." He motioned to the people standing behind him. "I formerly served as Dash." "Wait," Aang interrupted, "Lord Zhao, as in Dash." "Hello, Father." Commander Zhao had come down the gangplank, and his voice seemed like it was coming from straight behind Aang. "I must say, you're leading a very active retirement." Fortunately, Aang was able to keep himself from jumping in surprise. It tended to intimidate people when airbenders startled by leaping clear into the sky. "Ah, so you guys are related. That's, great. Thank you, young Avatar." Lord Zhao offered a bland kind of smile, and then looked back to the younger Zhao. "I'm pleased to see you survived your visit to the capital, my son. There was any number of worrying rumors going around. When I heard of your successful mission to aid Prince Zuko, I knew I had to come see you and offer my congratulations. Fortunately, the Fire Palace needed a respected representative to verify the claims and organize this little gathering." He looked back to Aang. "For now, Avatar, I've arranged a proper welcome for you. Afterward, you can settle into your guest quarters in Governor Hij's estate, and then there will be a dinner reception where you can tell your story and properly get to know everyone. For now, Dash." For now, Aang took over. A respectful exchange of names and exhibition of the Fire Nation's strength is enough. "I've experienced a Fire Nation welcome ceremony before." "Excellent. Then let's proceed." Lord Zhao stepped away and motioned to the soldiers who had been standing in formation around the gathering. They all wore firebender armor, and as one, they snapped fists into the air and created a canopy of flame. Lord Zhao called out above the roaring of the fire, "The homeland welcomes Avatar Aang and Prince Zuko. Let us receive them with honor." Somewhere behind the soldiers, banners were raised bearing the sigil of the Fire Nation, and a group of singers began a chant that Aang recognized as an ancient military song about the final battle between the Agni warrior and the Dragon Empire. When the chanting reached a crescendo, the fire roared almost in tune with the voices, and then both the song and flames faded at the same moment. The fires didn't entirely dissipate, though, merely settling down as floating globes above each soldier's fist. At that point, the first of the nobles stepped forward. He came up to Aang and Zuko and bowed at the waist. "Avatar. And my prince, I offer you hospitality. I am Governor Hij, and as long as you are my guests, everything that I own is yours. May the Fire Nation's power last 10,000 years." Aang recognized the basic sentiment from the time when Monk Gyatso first brought him to the Fire Nation and he made friends with a boy named Kuzan, but one of the words of the greeting had changed. Last time, the speaker had said, "May the Fire Nation's people last 10,000 years." Nevertheless, Aang and Zuko both bowed to the man. It took a while to get through the whole line of people, each one offering an introduction and some sentiment of welcome. Aang did his best to memorize all the names and hoped he wouldn't be quizzed on them later. The last three people in the line weren't like the others. There was a young man and a young woman, and an old lady behind them. The man wore a poncho that hid his arms, and seemed to Aang to be especially light on his feet as he approached. The younger woman wore a fitted tunic as black as her dull hanging hair, and Aang spotted a number of sheathed long knives and small swords strapped over her body. There wasn't as many blades as Maya wore, but these weren't for throwing. Probably. The old lady was the most normal, with her silver hair wrapped high atop her head and held in place with thick white pins, wearing fine robes that would have fit in with the rest of the gathering if it wasn't for the large maroon blindfold tied over her eyes and nose. In the very center of the blindfold, there was a symbol painted in gold, the character for dragon. Obviously, these three were warriors. Before any of them could get close, Aang's view was suddenly blocked by what turned out to be Mai. She must have disembarked from King Toph's ship during the ceremony. Her body was tense, and she had allowed her sleeves to fully cover her hands in what Aang had learned was a sign she was clutching weapons. The three warriors all stopped, but showed no sign of being offended or even disconcerted. "Lady Caldera Yu Mai," the old woman said with a nod. "I'd recognize those cold veins anywhere. Please, introduce us to your charges. Then we have a bit of business to take care of." "Non-violent business." Mai glanced back at Aang, and although her face was blank, he thought he could see some real tenseness around her eyes. Still, she stepped aside just enough to restore Aang's view of the warriors. "Aang, Zuko, these are my colleagues. The man is Bang Fei, 90-point practitioner of Dim Mak. Next to him is Heiyashi, a blade master of Kilauea. And last is Lady Caldera Yu Garel, known by the title, the Seeing Dragon. They are highly respected within the Fire Nation." Aang wasn't sure what that meant, but thankfully, Zuko seemed to have a tendency to blurt things out loud, and said, "They're weapons." Oh. No wonder Mai was worried about them. Aang bowed his head to them. "You three must be very accomplished. I greet you in peace." Zuko gave his own silent nod. The weapons all bowed. Lady Garel smiled beneath her blindfold. "Your blood runs warm, Avatar. I hope our weather agrees with you. Bang Fei, say what you need to say. Everyone is waiting for us." The man, Bang Fei, turned to Mai and clasped his hands in front of him. "Lady Mai, I know I am very late with this, but I wanted to express my sympathies for the loss of Lady Tai Li. Business kept me away from the capital for a while, and then you had gone to the South Pole, but I always carried the loss in the fires of my heart and know you must still feel the same pain. Tai Li was such a special girl. Truly, the world is a darker place without her. Please, if there's anything I can ever do to help you in her memory, don't hesitate to tell me. I am at your service." He bowed from the waist again, going low enough to demonstrate considerable flexibility, and held it for a long moment. Zuko blurted out, "Wait, Tai Li is dead? No one told me." Aang caught Mai glancing at him. Tai Li wasn't dead, having instead become an airbender and helping Aang just before the battle at Ba Sing Se. She was now accompanying Katara on her journey with the Northern Waterbender Master, Pakku. Tai Li had asked everyone to keep her survival a secret from Zuko and his sister Azula, out of fear of what they would do to her. Bang Fei turned a glare on Zuko that even gave Aang a chill, but then the weapon relaxed. "She mourned for your banishment, Prince Zuko. Her heart was so very warm, that way. I'm sure it would have delighted her to hear of your restoration." Then he moved to return to the rest of the gathering, Heiyashi falling into step behind him. Lady Garel did not depart with the other two. She turned her head in Mai's direction as though she could see through the blindfold. "Your family is alive in the capital, and under Piandeo's protection. Whatever this business was, you have safely come out of it. With luck, what comes next will not require escalated involvement." Aang finally saw Mai relax as she said, "Thank you. I, too, would like to avoid escalation." Lady Garel nodded and turned to go. Despite the blindfold, she did not seem to have any trouble making her own way back to the rest of the assembly. Aang suppressed a shudder. What was that about? It was Zuko who answered first with, "Lady Garel was saying that she hopes she and the other weapons won't have to fight anyone over what we're doing. But it was also a warning that she and the others are here in their official capacity as weapons and might be ordered to act. Other weapons are probably being recalled and placed on standby, too." Mai brought her hands together within her sleeves. Pretty much. The Fire Lord might even take back the weapons whose service he'd gifted to other people. Like how Piandao works for Prince Oze, Zuko's father, so he's the one really protecting my family. If Oze changes his mind about me, or the Fire Lord takes back Piandao's service, then my family is in danger from the most deadly weapon of them all. Zuko started to say, my father wouldn't dash. He let the rest of the thought die on his tongue. Aang didn't need an explanation for what that meant. And that bit with Bang Fei talking about your friend Ty Lee. Mai snorted. Oh, he was hot for her since he first noticed girls. I heard that when he got the news of her death, he mourned her by painting a life-size full-body portrait. Ty Lee never really liked him, though. They both fought with the dim mak style, and she disagreed with his particular use of it. I can't believe Ty Lee is gone, Zuko said. How did it happen? Aang wasn't sure how to reply. Mai, of course, kept her face blank under Zuko's questioning gaze. I'll tell you later. It looks like the Zhao family is coming back. Aang looked, and sure enough, Lord Zhao and Commander Zhao were both approaching. The older man smiled when he reached them and said, well, I'm sure you were properly honored by everyone's attentions. Come, Governor Hij's mansion awaits us, and I'm sure you're eager to rest after your journey and standing around in this heat. Aang shrugged. Oh, airbenders can regulate our own body temperatures with our breathing, so I'm fine. But I bet my friends will be glad to get off the ship and relax, like you said. Is there enough room for my sky bison Appa? He's pretty big and eats a lot, but he'll be well behaved in any stable as long as it's nice and roomy. Aang was a bit worried about how long it took Lord Zhao to say something. You're what? The younger Zhao snickered. That's what I said. The Avatar has a sky bison, father, and I suppose it's your duty to organize his accommodations. The news spread. A network of metal wires that spanned the whole world, built with patience and ingenuity by the Fire Nation to spread its word across the lands it had stolen and subjugated, blazed with electric life. Across the globe, one message was given overriding priority and passed from station to echo far and wide. Avatar met. Zuko confirmed. Those 4 simple words heralded a major shift in the fate of the world. Some people read them and simply shrugged, thinking it just another development in Fire Nation politics, nothing that would make a difference to the common soldier. After all, weren't the royals always competing and enacting all kinds of drama? Prince Zuko's banishment hadn't affected anything important, and while the Avatar's return was certainly a bit of a game-changer, his playing politics with some young prince was hardly anything compared to the destruction of a volcano island. Wiser minds understood, however, that major changes usually start as more innocuous maneuvers. Even something simple can have a major impact, if it occurs in the right place. The news was that the Avatar had come to the Fire Nation and changed the dynamic of the family that currently ran the entire world. And that news was received with the most trepidation by the Fire Palace itself. At one time, the most important room in the palace, the figurative center of the entire world, had been the throne room. It had been there that the Fire Lords, first Sozin and then his son Ajalon, held court and issued the commands that fueled the Fire Nation's war of conquest. Now, however, the throne room was dark and cold. The burning throne was no longer lit with even the weakest flame, that was now a mere act of theater reserved for increasingly rare public spectacle. The Fire Lord currently spent most of his time in his private rooms, and his court had shrunk appropriately. In fact, his court was now limited to 2 people. The old sisters Li and Lo received the wired news of Zuko's confirmation in their office. At one point, the office had been Fire Lord Ajalon's receiving parlor, but he had retreated into the back rooms of his apartment years ago, and Li and Lo had converted the parlor to be their watch house. No one could see the Fire Lord without passing through their domain. Li put down the paper that had been carried straight from the communication hub. So Prince Zuko indeed made good on his claim. Lo picked the paper up, gazing at the words that she didn't really need to read. But the question remains as to his true aim. Li retrieved a blank form from the office's cabinet and brought it over to her desk. She kneeled over it, spread the paper out flat, and began filling it in with deft strokes of an inked brush. That alone strengthens Oze considerably, and if has truly forged an alliance with the Avatar, there will be no denying his will in the homeland. Lo kneeled on the other side of the desk, confirming her sister's work. Yet I still cannot see Oze's true purpose. He hides in his rooms and shows his face only when called. If he has any great plan, it is built on a foundation of sand. And then, of course, there is the matter of Iroh. Whether he has any involvement is something we cannot know. The two sisters met each other's eyes. When they spoke again, it was only to confirm the decisions they had already made. Li said, "We will play for the factors that neither prince has yet won." Lo said, "The fire sages and the peasantry give support only to Azulin. Favor will be shown to the sages, giving them influence long lost to Iroh in a past political game. And further pressure will be placed on the people so that Azulin is the sole recognized royal name. And our weapon at the site," they intoned simultaneously, "will continue with our plan." The sisters nodded and rose up as one. Together, they brought the form into the private rooms of Fire Lord Azulin. As expected, they found him propped up in his bed, staring at nothing. "Fire Lord," the sister said. Azulin blinked once, and then again. His eyes searched the opulent surroundings, not focusing until he found Li and Lo standing in the bedroom's doorway. He stared until he recognized them, and then sat up a little straighter. As old and weak as he might be, the sisters knew that it wasn't in his character to show weakness even in front of his most trusted agents. And trusted agents they were. Through sheer dint of longevity, they were his most loyal servants, making his will into fact and protecting him from those with the gall to actually try to siphon power from their Fire Lord. "My clever ones," Azulin mumbled. That was what he called them. It was possible he had forgotten their names, and they knew for a fact that he always had trouble telling them apart, but Li and Lo were satisfied with the title. In their youth they had commanded beauty that made them famous across the whole homeland. As adults they became feared as a fighting duo who could defeat almost any opponent. Had the title existed back then, they might have been made weapons of the Fire Nation. As their backs bent and their skin wrinkled, they had shifted their domain into the realm of politics, strengthening Azulin's influence at a time when his mind and body began weakening. Whether they used kisses, weapons, money, law, blackmail, or whispers in the right places, the consistent source of the sisters' success was their capacity for strategy and analysis. Clever ones, indeed. There were only two minds Li and Lo feared as rivals, but Prince Iroh had holed himself up at the North Pole and Princess Azula would never see beyond her father's pettiness. Li slipped the form she had just filled out on the tray in front of Azulin. "This just needs your mark, my lord. The end of Prince Zuko's banishment has been confirmed and requires your final approval." Lo stepped up to the other side of Azulin's bed. "And as thanks to the Way of the Flame for strengthening and restoring a member of the royal family, we have prepared an edict to grant new land and funds to the Fire Sages, with which they will build glorious temples worthy of your greatness." "Greatness," Azulin mumbled, staring blankly at the paper in front of him. Li edged closer to him. "You are wise to strengthen the Fire Sages at this time, Fire Lord. The people should show their appreciation for your wisdom." Lo brought her voice down to a whisper. "This edict will also create a new monthly celebration. On Azulin Day, all citizens will be required to take time off from work to visit a fire temple, make an offering to the flames, and meditate on your wisdom." "Hail Fire Lord Azulin," the sisters hissed together. Azulin continued staring at the paper. Li put an inked brush into his right hand, and Lo guided it to the proper place on the form. "Zuko." Azulin's voice rose in volume as he said his grandson's name. "Zuko came back? It was a sorrow what happened. Send him away to hide Oze's shame." The Fire Lord blinked. "Zuko is back? Good." His hand moved, and he made a sloppy mark at the bottom of the form. "Excellent, my lord," Li said. "We will have this put into effect at once." "All hail Fire Lord Azulin," Lo added. Azulin smiled as his eyes lost focus once more. Princess Azula, namesake of the Fire Lord, had not even changed out of her sleeveless training tunic before going to see her father. There was no practical reason for her choice. The delay required for her to change and wipe her face would have been minimal, but it was a delay she had decided there was no need to tolerate. The news she was delivering might be the key that prompted father to share his latest wisdom. Azula was always eager to receive her father's wisdom. As always, she paused before the guarded door of the suite and waited while one of the ex-soldiers announced her presence with a knock on the door. She always tolerated the procedure, but today it only added to her anxiety. Nevertheless, she kept firm control of her impatience and made sure she showed no sign of anything but the utmost respect. The door opened, and Father appeared before her, as delighted as ever to find her waiting for him. "Angela, did you cut your training short to come see me?" He led the way into his rooms. "It was no trouble, Father." Technically, she had indeed cut her training session off for this visit, but that was only because she had spent the last weeks doing nothing but training while she waited for something to happen. It had taken a week to oversee Zhao's initial report about the Avatar's capture and then get back to the palace to give a direct accounting to Father. Father, understandably, needed time to consider the news. Time that had now stretched to over a week. It wasn't that Angela was being critical of her father. She would never do such a thing. But he had been so happy when she told him of Zuko's imminent return he had pulled her into his arms and told her what a perfect daughter and sister she was. Father had said how proud he was of her, surviving everything she did and working so hard to keep Zuko safe. Angela had scarcely known how to respond. She could only state her thanks for the praise over and over, and she didn't stop smiling the whole time. Father always praised her successes, of course, but since Zuko's banishment, his acknowledgments had become so intense. Angela still hadn't quite learned how to deal with it, even after all these years. It wasn't at all like dealing with Ty Lee's shallow enthusiasm. As they passed into the parlor, Father said, "Would you like something to drink? It's important to take care of yourself with how hard you work." "I'm fine, Father. I bring news of Zuko. He successfully arrived on Zenmatsu Island, and Grandfather acknowledged the end of the banishment along with 2 concerning riders." She described the gift of land and money to the Fire Sages, as well as the establishment of Ajalan Day. "Does that affect our plans?" She watched as Father leaned back in his seat and pondered the news. She watched as Father's expression grew concerned. That, too, was something new since Zuko's banishment. Before, Father was not given to displays of the weaker emotions. He would show pleasure and amusement, disgust and anger, but never sadness or worry. Yet, when Angela had recounted her adventures in the colonial continent with Zuko and Suki, of what had happened on Crescent Island and in the Ba Sing Se Ashland, she had seen his face blanch and contort in fear. Fear for his children. She didn't know what to think of that, didn't know how to reconcile the strength she knew her father had with such unguarded displays. She didn't know how to feel that he cared so much, felt so deeply for her that having her safe in front of him was no balm against stories of past dangers. Fortunately, Father finally spoke and spared Angela from her own thoughts. "I'm so happy about Zuko's return, but I'm very concerned about what has brought it about. Iroh is playing a game of some kind, and now your grandfather is pushing back against him. That's what this business with the sages is about." Angela leaned forward. "Were they going to get involved as a third faction?" Father continued, "I would be content to let them tear each other apart, but Iroh saw fit to drag Zuko into things. Neither he nor Ajalan will show any sense of boundaries as their conflict escalates." Angela nodded. "What do you want me to do?" "I am yours to command." Father blinked. "Command?" "No, Angela, I respect you enough to let you decide your own actions. However, if you would be so kind, there are some ways in which I could use your help. You, and our other servants." Sokka couldn't say he was crazy about hanging out in the Fire Nation, relying only on a promise of safety from a bunch of people who cheered for world domination, but he had to admit that the rooms in Governor Hij's mansion were pretty nice. Aang's whole party, Mai and Topha's crew and Zuko and Suki had all been given apartments that opened out into a shared atrium open to the summer sky. The whole complex was light and spacious with big open windows and more pillows than anyone on this planet had any right to. The atrium was even big enough for Appa to stay there, sparing Zhao the older further work, and had a large fountain in the center where Momo was currently trying to catch the decorative fish. Clearly, it was an evil trap to get them all to lower their guard. "So there are 3 one-person armies hanging around watching us," Sokka summarized, Aang having just finished his account of meeting the weapons. He was sprawled on a piece of furniture in Aang's quarters that he suspected was a divan, with Aang and Mai and Toph all standing around him. Speaking of watching, I bet there are spy holes all over these rooms. Toph went, She stomped a foot against the ground and tilted her head from side to side. There are passages between the walls where people could listen, but there's no one there, now. We should have any important discussions in the courtyard, or else get that lemur to practice its singing while you whisper. Sokka was impressed. That was a good idea for using Momo. See, King Toph knows what's up. Don't let these Fire Nation masterminds fool you. They're born evil. My side. Thanks. But except for that last part, you're not wrong. The good news, though, is that if they intended to bump us off no matter what, they wouldn't have revealed that there are other weapons here. It's just a reminder to behave, and we don't even know from whom. Tonight at dinner, we should start feeling people out. Look to see who reacts to what, and listen for comments that aren't necessarily directed at you. In fact, we should probably do more listening than talking tonight in general. Except, of course, for our avatar. Yeah, Aang said. Lord Zhao said tonight I get to tell my story. I guess that means everything that's led up to this point, except for the parts where Prince Iroh sent me here to convince everyone to overthrow the Fire Lord. Sokka nodded and tried to sit up, and only almost fell off the divan. Yeah, leave all the stuff about convincing people to commit treason for the third date. Toph laughed at that, but no one else. She might be a bit pushy and had a little bit of a god complex, but at least she had a good sense of humor. With that, the little gathering broke up so that everyone could get ready for the dinner. Sokka headed back to his own rooms across the courtyard. As he passed the fountain, Momo held up one of the evil Fire Nation fish. He had just caught a fish that was probably a spy of some kind, come to think of it, and Sokka waved his approval. When he reached his rooms, he almost didn't notice Suki waiting for him. She was tucked on his own divan, just like he had been in Aang's apartment. Hi, she said. Sokka stopped well short of her. She was no longer wearing that Fire Nation uniform, having changed into more casual clothes colored in neutral browns and golds, but he knew that all enemies didn't necessarily wear uniforms. Hi, yourself. She sat up off the divan much more gracefully than he himself had managed. We haven't really had a chance to talk since basing SE. I was in protective custody on Zhao's ship with Zuko, and dash. Yeah, Sokka interrupted. Apparently you've been doing a lot with Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation. Suki nodded. That's what I figured you'd want to talk about. Sokka stepped fully into the room and leaned against one of the pillars. Why me? Why not Aang or Mai? I figured you'd be the one best able to understand. And honestly, I've always kind of disliked Mai. She's a jerk. Sokka shrugged. That much was true, at least. And what is it that I'm supposed to understand? Because I'm not really sure there's a good explanation for a Kyoshi rebel to end up bodyguarding the Fire Nation prince who was trying to catch the Avatar. Really? I thought that would be the easiest part to get. I guess I should start by admitting that I was the double agent in the Kyoshi rebels. Sokka blinked. He hadn't been expecting that. So, it wasn't just Mai who you dash. Not quite. I didn't blow the operation to find your sister's records. And that's because I was also a triple agent keeping the Fire Nation from discovering anything of real use to them. Sokka felt himself slump. It was going to be one of those stories. Suki continued, I got maneuvered into a corner and framed for something else by Zhao after you guys left, and playing along seemed like the best chance. It kept me alive and put me in a good position to sabotage what I could. I wound up working with Zuko after he was arrested by Zhao, too. And what better place for a servant of Kyoshi than next to the guy who was the biggest danger to the Avatar? I even convinced Zuko to help fight that monster at Ba Sing Se instead of attacking Aang. Sokka had to admit that the logic held up. So what are you still doing, playing his bodyguard and marching around in a Fire Nation uniform? Suki winced. Yeah, that's the bit I expected to be difficult. And would you believe that I'm kind of friends with Zuko? Sokka considered that. He didn't like the idea of Suki being friends with a Fire Nation prince, even if they were allies for now. It felt like she was basically saying that she preferred Zuko to where she really belonged. You know, Aang and Mai first ran into Zuko on Crescent Island. Where they were keeping my sister in a room so hot it burned all the moisture away. She looked half mummified when I freed her. Zuko had been waiting there for us, and he attacked Aang. Hunted him and beat him up. Suki stood up and put her hands on her hips. Really? And how did Zuko know you were going to there? She blinked in innocent, completely artificial manner. Through gritted teeth, Sokka said, Mai told him because she was working for the Fire Nation at the time. But you knew that? Suki shrugged. When I heard, it certainly didn't improve my opinion of her. But I did understand her. Lying, pretending to betray her old friends while planning to betray her new ones, constantly worrying that she'd just end up hurting everyone. I found myself relating. So you're saying you're Mai's what, inverse? I'm not even sure if that's a good thing. No, because she betrayed Zuko, eventually. I haven't betrayed you or Aang. I won't let Zuko hurt you guys, either, because you're all my friends. And to demonstrate, I have a warning to pass on. Zuko's sister is the one you have to watch out for. She likes hurting people, and she's decided that Mai has to die for what she did at Crescent Island. And, what, Zuko was too busy to let his old friend know about that? Or is this his roundabout way of getting back at her? Suki turned away. I think he just can't deal with it. Then she raised her gaze again. And I trust that letting you know is doing what he would really want. I do intend to tell him. Sokka looked her in her big blue eyes. It took me a while to forgive Mai. Yeah, I'd imagine. And it definitely changed how I think of her. Knowing that she's capable of doing those kinds of things, even if she wound up hurting herself and regretting it all. Suki nodded, but there was no hiding the slump of her shoulders. A liar is a difficult person to have as a friend. Yeah. Sokka sighed. But I'm not picky about friends so long as they don't want to kill me. If you need any help with Zuko I know I can count on you. All of you. Suki held out a hand. Sokka walked over and clasped his own hand over her wrist, and she gripped his in turn. By Water Tribe tradition, they were now bound by trust and friendship. So let's make sure our buddies aren't poisoned tonight at dinner. I don't think the Fire Nation is very into poison. Have you tried their food? It's spicy enough to count. Chapter 43, Sight Beyond Sight. Katara awoke to the sound of a lazy bell. She rolled out of the narrow bed and heard Ty Lee immediately spread out to cover the freed space, but the loss of territory was secondary to the sight outside the porthole on the opposite wall. The room would have been spacious if not for the crates stuffed along the walls, but it had been a supply room before Master Pakku agreed to take on 2 female crew members. The rest of the crew, Fire Navy, and Northern Waterbenders both, men all, were packed into their own long hammock-filled room, but Pakku's sexism at least made him quickly agree to give Katara and Ty Lee their own space. They probably could have made 2 beds out of the crates and tarps in the supply room, but neither girl trusted the lock on the door, and sharing a bed was an easy way to watch over each other while sleeping. As Katara dodged around crates to get to the porthole, she had to admit that she also liked sleeping with Ty Lee. Having another warm body pressed against her was a gentle reminder that she wasn't still in a cage on Crescent Island. She hadn't woken up with any panic attacks since they started sharing. In fact, she was probably feeling the least amount of anxiety since the encounter with Aunt Wu. Also, Ty Lee smelled like mountain peaches. That was nice. But Katara still wore her hat when outside. She looked through the porthole and her smile grew wider. Glowing with the light of the setting sun, the open ocean sprawled to the horizon. The ship was finally on its way. Which meant her proper training was about to begin. Katara set about dressing and tying her hair while Ty Lee sat up in bed and yawned. Katara couldn't help saying, "What happened to that bright and peppy morning girl who was part of our group after we got you out of that sinkhole?" Ty Lee gave a tired laugh. "She's bright and peppy when the sun is coming up and our natural energies are on the rise. Getting up like this when the sun is setting is weird." Katara pulled her hair loopus into place and grabbed her hat. "You could switch shifts, you know. It's okay." Ty Lee hopped up and shook her head hard enough to send her loose hair flying. "No way. I came on this trip to watch over you and support you. I can't do that if I'm snoring and twisting and dreaming of pink elephant rats on parade while you're out there hoisting anchors." Or whatever Paku has you doing. Katara had actually been doing quite a bit around the ship. Paku's ship, or, rather, Zhao's ship that Paku was in charge of, had left Topha's base at Full Moon Bay weeks ago and began making its way down the riverway across the Earth Kingdom. Paku had directed his waterbenders to aid the Fire Navy crew, and especially had kept Katara busy helping with all aspects of the ship's function. She had tied lines, tightened clamps in the engine room, swabbed the deck, fetched charts for the bridge crew, fried fish in the galley, and helped fix a bilge pump. "You need to create a greater affinity for your element," Master Paku had said, "and missed the life on the seas that is the legacy of our tribes. I want to experience as much of crewing a ship as you can get before we reach the ocean." Of course, this was a Fire Nation warship, and sometimes Katara's hands shook as she moved through the warm, metal, lamplit interior. The engine room especially reminded her of the prison on Crescent Island. While the metal ceilings cut off the view of the sky, she was not any more comfortable than she was flying on Appa. That's why sleeping with Ty Lee was so helpful. Not waking up each morning expecting a cage around her was a great source of strength. "Well," Katara said, "I really appreciate your being here. I know you probably would have preferred to be with Mai or the other airbenders. Ty Lee stepped over and pulled Katara in a hug. "I prefer to be where my aura is pinkest and I'm making a positive difference in the world." She pulled back and looked Katara right in the eyes. "My aura wouldn't be pink if I had to worry about Azula, and you're my friend. We didn't grow up together like I did with Mai, but you're still a friend and I love all my friends." Katara could only giggle. She wasn't sure if she deserved that kind of devotion from someone she only knew for less than 2 months, or what to make of Ty Lee having grown up in the Fire Nation, but Ty Lee's cheer was all too contagious. Thanks. Of course. Now, you go up and see Master Grumpy Pants. I'll be up for the next crew shift as soon as I have myself looking like a proper mysterious airbender nun." Ty Lee winked and skipped over to where she kept her robes. Katara wasn't sure why Ty Lee was playing up her airbending instead of her Fire Nation upbringing, or even the circus background that she had seemed so proud of, but she had a feeling the explanation only made sense to Ty Lee. "Yeah. See you later." Katara hurried off to her waterbending lessons. And it was great knowing that this room would be a safe place to return to at the end of the shift. Katara made her way with familiarity up to the main deck, where the next shift would start. She found herself moving through the halls of the ship along with other waterbenders, all part of Master Paku's crew from the North Pole. The night crew shift was mostly made up of these waterbenders, both because their bending was more powerful at night and because anyone observing the ship was less likely to notice the strange crew without the sun shining down. As usual, Master Paku was already waiting on the deck when Katara and the others emerged. He stood looking out past the ship's prow at the open ocean. Katara pulled her hat down to block out the sky and took her own look around. The ocean was compelling, but she couldn't ignore Chameleon Bay at the ship's stern or the Fire Nation base that had been built over the bay. Part of what had lengthened the journey was waiting to be allowed to sail through the checkpoint that managed the flow of traffic and shipments into the colonies. When she reached Paku her Saifu, she bowed low. "Good evening, Master." Paku didn't even bother looking at her. "So, are you ready to do some real training?" "Yes, sir. But I have done real training before. Master Hama taught me waterbending forms." Paku acknowledged that with a nod. "And he did a good job. Your forms, aside from the lack of sophistication inherent in the Southern style, aren't completely terrible. When I said real training, I meant in comparison to the scut work you've been doing. Master Hama is a woman." "Oh." Paku finally turned to look at her. "Well, let's get on with it, yes? Come with me." He led Katara back towards the bridge tower, but not into it. He took a narrow path around the central structure to the aft deck. Katara stopped short when she saw what was waiting there. There was a large well in the center of the deck where a trebuchet could be set up. The machinery had been emptied from the space, though, and some of Master Paku's students were using their waterbending to stream a ribbon of ocean into a waist-deep pool. Katara blinked. "What is this?" "A bath." Paku snorted. "Some of the crew could use one. But no, it's where you are going to be doing your training. You'll be waterbending in the water." "Appropriate, yes. I don't have to take my clothes off, do I? Paku's sour expression was a hardening answer all its own, but he also said, I would very much prefer if you didn't. Now, come. Without even taking off his own jacket, he hopped down into the water, sending ripples through the pool. The students finished their waterbending, and took stances of attention all around it. Okay, then. If this was real waterbending training, then Katara was ready. She went over and jumped into the pool, immediately feeling the water soaking into her leggings and tunic. The water was a bit cool compared to the warmth of the twilight, but not uncomfortable. When she waded over to Paku, he reached into a pocket and pulled out a thick bolt of blue cloth. He soaked it in the water, saturating it, and then brought it out again and squeezed the excess liquid out, leaving it wrinkled and damp. Tie this around your eyes. What? He wanted to blindfold her? I just close my eyes to meditate. Paku shook his head. We're not meditating right now. I could teach some new mental exercises that could help you, and I will be doing that later, so don't think you're off that particular hook. For now, we're going to address the fact that while you already know waterbending forms, you're not truly feeling your element. Working on a ship will help you grow into the lifestyle, but that's a slow process. This will be much more immediate. You won't be able to see the water, so to bend it you will need to feel it. To sense my position and movements, you'll need to get the water that surrounds us both to tell you. Now, does that satisfy your precocious curiosity, or are you ready to believe that a waterbending master might have a few tricks up his sleeve for teaching students of unusual backgrounds? Wow, what a cranky old man. No wonder Gran ran away from this guy. I am ready, master. She held up her hand. Rather than giving her the blindfold, Paku leaned forward and wrapped it around her head. He tied it tightly in the back, completing cutting off Katara's vision and blocking out all light. Then he yanked her head off. Hey. You don't need that, his voice came. Do you? Katara frowned. She couldn't see anything, never mind the sky. It was like being back in that unlit hut in King Tofa's cavern base. There was just darkness all around her, and the embrace of the water up to her waist. No, I guess I don't. Okay. Now what? Now, his voice came from farther away, find me. Splash me. Hit me with a water whip. Anything that will demonstrate that you can sense my position in the pool. Katara began concentrating. Toph had long ago decided that it was good to be Earth King. Here she was, in the Fire Nation itself, attending a fancy party of politicians and military jerks and even a few elite assassins, all people who would have cheered when her country and home and parents burned. If any of them had bumped into Toph back in the Earth Kingdom, where she had worn properly filthy clothes instead of these fancy layers of silk, they would have called her a rebel and tried to set her on fire. Tried being the operative word, as all those traumatized soldiers outside of Jailing's burning ruins would probably be all too eager to confirm. Now, seated at a place of honor at Governor Hidge's big butt dinner table, Toph knocked back some of the tasty fruity beverage she had been served and slammed the emptied cup down on the table. Immediately, a servant leaned towards her. More sparkberry juice, Your Majesty. Toph sniffed and held her head high. More would please me. As her cup was refilled, all the Fire Nation jerks around her whispered happily about how the Earth King herself, King. Some asked, but others shushed them, and in one amusing case smacked his friend upside the head, was enjoying a local product, about what an honor it was for them and their island. Yep, it was good to be king. The party was an hour in, and so far no one had died, which made it a pretty tame party as far as Toph was concerned. But this was mainly for Aang and this Prince Zuko guy, and both of them struck her as pretty tame when they weren't fighting giant ash monsters. But then, that was the whole point of this little jaunt, to turn the Fire Nation tame by way of regime change. And to do that, they had to play nice and convince all these jerks to overthrow the Fire Lord in favor of his supposedly better son. And if that didn't work, Toph was willing to consider an act or two of regicide. After all, these people wouldn't be shy about trying to kill her in a less formal setting. They wouldn't succeed, but they'd still try, the poor little dunderheads. Toph shifted on her palanquin, thoughtfully provided by Governor Hidge for her royal use tonight, so that she could place her feet flat on the floor. She extended her earth sense through the ground, blocking out the sound of the conversations but letting the vibrations of the chatting and laughing and grunting and chewing define the world for her. At the head of the table, Avatar Aang was seated with Prince Zuko, Lady Caldera Umai, Suki, Lord Zhao, and Governor Hij. Aang was talking about a holiday that the air nomads used to celebrate with a big feast. Toph felt sorry for the kid. She knew what it was like to not have a home to return to, anymore. True, she hadn't actually liked returning to that home back when she had it, but she had always expected it to be there. Now that it wasn't, now that Jailing and the Earth Rumble and the Beifong estate and they were gone, the world didn't feel quite right. Aang probably felt that way, too. But at least he didn't have to struggle to get people to acknowledge him. He was an airbender and a waterbender, and Toph had even started him on some earthbending training during their preparations for this trip. His abilities were proof enough that he was the Avatar. Toph, on the other hand, had been faced with more of a struggle after Jailing. She had only her passport and her cowardly earthbending teacher with which to convince people that she was really the Beifong heir, and never mind the hoops she had been forced to jump through to steal the title of Earth King. Still, Aang was a good kid, so she didn't throw that kind of thing in his face. Shifting the focus of her earth sense, Toph also picked the rest of her allies at the dinner table, Sokka and her earthbenders and even Commander Zhao. They were less chatty, doing more listening than talking. Of course, they couldn't listen as well as Toph, but they couldn't help that. Toph also picked out another trio down at the far end of the table. She hadn't been ashore for that welcoming ceremony where these three people had made themselves known to Aang and Mai, but it didn't take long to find them here. Of everyone in the room, those three people walked with the most grace, the most efficiency. Mai alone in the entire assembly matched their poise. So it wasn't exactly a stretch to peg these three yahoos as weapons of the Fire Nation. What a dumb title. Toph could feel the tension in their bodies as they ate. They weren't friends with each other, even though they were sticking together as a group. The old woman Lady Caldera Ugaral, Mai had called her, had to be the one in charge, or else the most dangerous. The other two, Bang Fei was the guy with light feet and Hei Yaeshi was the girl with steel weighing her limbs down, kept looking at Garel, either taking cues from her or making sure that she hadn't moved when they weren't paying attention. Interesting. What Toph found especially notable, though, was that Garel never looked at anything. Aang had said that she wore a blindfold, but Toph hadn't immediately accepted that as a sign of blindness. She remembered how, as a little girl, one of the healers working for her parents had blindfolded her on the theory that it would let her eyes rest and eventually recover the ability to see that she had lost when she was born. The idiot was fired 6 months later. Also, Mom had once talked about how some cloth was thin enough that people could see through it. There was any number of reasons Garel could be wearing a blindfold, from health reasons to trickery. But she didn't look around. She didn't face people who spoke to her. She didn't angle her head for a better view of something. So, blind or not, Garel was acting like she didn't use her eyes. Did she rely on hearing? Or some other trick? Mai said that Garel was a firebender. As Toph let that one roll around in her head, servants came forward to take everyone's dishes away. Toph felt Governor Hij stand up, and a second later he announced, Avatar Aang will now tell his tale of how he faced adversity and dishonorable forces to come visit our glorious homeland. Give him your honorable attention, and as you do, please enjoy these frozen sugar treats, a delicacy from Desito Island brought to us by Governor Lyko. The room briefly became noisy again and Toph felt all kinds of vibrations lighting up the earth as servants placed desserts in front of every guest and everyone else leaned back and got ready for story time. Everyone except the weapons. The girl, Hei Yaeshi, stood up. Garel must have noticed, without moving her head, as Toph heard her voice echo through the floor with, "You don't wish to hear this." Toph strained to hear Hei Yaeshi's response, "I was briefed on current events. I'm more interested in a different perspective." And then she began walking directly towards. Hei Yaeshi was approaching Prince Zuko. Aang began with, it's been nice to meet you all. I guess that my story began at the Southern Air Temple. It didn't escape Toph that Twinkle Toes there wouldn't be able to do a big story time thing and pay attention to what Zuko was doing at the same time. As for the others, Fancy Lady Mai might have a blind spot, for her old friend, Sokka probably wasn't close enough to hear a whispered conversation, and who know what that Suki girl was all about. Toph might just have to do some earthbending enhanced eavesdropping on their Fire Nation ally. It might be good to be king, but it was even better to be Toph Beifong. When Zuko caught the feminine shadow approaching him out of the corner of his right eye, he thought that it was Mai, but a quick glance confirmed that she was still sitting next to Aang, ready to poke the kid if he started to say something that shouldn't be announced to a group of Fire Nation governors. And if Suki was still seated at his left, guarding the side where he was missing an eye, then this newcomer was no friend. He turned, inhaling in preparation for possible fire bending, and found Heihachi, the weapon of the Fire Nation, approaching. Like Mai, she was pale-skinned and dark-haired, and her dark tunic almost hid the black long sheaths strapped to her. But Heihachi was displaying a toothy little grin, and her eyes were shining. "Prince Zuko, would you honor me with permission to join you?" Her voice was low and scratchy, almost breathless, not the confident tone he would have expected of a woman with swords strapped to her forearms, thighs, and back. Combined with her unstyled hair, left to hang straight and black to her shoulders, it made her seem younger than Zuko knew she had to be. She was being polite, and so far he had no reason to suspect her of being an imminent danger to him. He nodded. She kneeled at his side, brushing some of her hair out of her eyes so that she could look up at him. "Thank you." She kept her voice down, no doubt to avoid disturbing Aang. "Are you enjoying your stay here on Zenmatsu Island?" She was close enough that Zuko wouldn't have even had to reach to grab one of the pair of swords on her back. He whispered, "Governor Hidge has been most welcoming. I am eager to return to the capital, though." "Yes, I expect that you are." She glanced over at Aang, who was stumbling over an explanation of his adventures at the South Pole without mentioning Zhao's antagonism, and then looked back over to Zuko with a smile and a face that was growing red. I am very glad that you have returned to the homeland, Prince Zuko. We have never met, but you have always been rather special to me. You and your sister, I mean." Zuko found that an odd thing to say. "Why? I was hardly an object of fame before my failures at Ba Sing Se." He had come to wonder if he really had failed at that battle, but he was hardly going to contradict the official story to someone he barely knew. She brought her hands together and stretched her arms down, lowering her gaze for a long moment. Was this weapon of the Fire Nation shy? Eventually, she looked back up at Zuko. "I had not yet been given a rank when you were banished, but I still kept track of the royal family. You are also important to the Fire Nation. And Zenmatsu Island is my home, so knowing that you and your sister, of course, came from Zenmatsu blood captured my interest. It made me realize that a simple warrior girl from the westernmost island could still accomplish something worthy of the highest recognition. I became a weapon thanks to your example." Zuko shook his head, trying to make sense of that. Aang was talking about ghosts in the Southern Air Temple, but Zuko couldn't escape the absurdity of what this woman was telling him. "I'm not of Zenmatsu blood. You just said I'm of the royal family dash." She blinked. "You don't know." He leaned closer to her. "Know what?" "Prince Zuko, did you not know that your mother was born on Zenmatsu?" Zuko flinched away from her. His mother was born on this very island. But no, that couldn't be. Zenmatsu had both minor nobility and wealthy merchant families who profited from the trade from the colonies, yes, but there was no way that someone from such stock could have married one of the Fire Lord's sons. Mother would have had to be from the capital itself, or perhaps one of the grand clans of the inner islands. She couldn't. Could she? He leaned close enough to Heihachi, close enough that he could smell the sharp licorice scent of her perfume, and hissed, "What was her name?" Heihachi's face colored again. "You Princess Ursa." But before she was a princess, she was Ursa of Hirae, a little village near the island's center. His mother was a peasant. No, it couldn't be. Could it? He recalled the last time he had seen her, in the rear courtyard of the fire palace. He had been out past sundown, practicing his fire bending away from Azula, meditating in the shadows and trying to maintain a little flame in his hands, when Piandao and Mother passed by him. They were both wearing hooded robes, and hadn't noticed him until he called out. He had asked where his father's bodyguard was taking his mother, but all Piandao had said was, "This has nothing to do with you, my prince." Go back inside, go to bed, and everything will be fine. Mother had added, don't worry yourself about me. Good night, Zuko. I will always protect you. That was the last Zuko ever saw of her. He had asked what happened, of course. He hadn't been given any answers, of course. Father had simply remained silent. Pandeo always said his honor would not allow him to speak of his duties. Angela would deflect and taunt him about something else, and Zuko eventually decided that she didn't know either. Could there? If there was something he could learn about Mother in this Hirae. Zuko knelt down beside Heihachi and took her hands in his own. Her face went even redder, but Zuko ignored that and said, where is this village? King Toph focused on Heihachi's body as she and Zuko began whispering about the location of this peasant village. Toph could feel the hammering of the weapon's heart and the noise of her breathing through the floor. There was no lie in her and no detachment, either. Her body was a storm of anxiety and excitement. Zuko was quickly becoming the same way, although there was more control in him. How strange that a sword-wielding weapon of the Fire Nation was more emotional than an angsty, angry, pouty firebender. While Aang finished the story about how the Ashlands in the Earth Kingdom were a sign that the whole world was in danger, Toph turned her focus back over to that oldest of the weapons, the old lady Garel in the blindfold. Garel, for the first time all night, had turned her head. Her covered face was pointed directly at Zuko and Heihachi. Then Garel turned so that she would have been facing Toph, if she could see through the blindfold, and smiled. Huh. Katara panted as water dripped down from her soaked blindfold and ran in rivulets down her face. They clung to her jawline and crawled down to her chin, where they came together into fat droplets and fell down into the pool. Each impact sent tiny ripples across the surface. She could almost imagine that she could feel those ripples through her saturated clothes. Just like she believed that she could feel the ripples coming off Master Pakku's movement on the other side of the pool. Too bad she'd been thinking that for the last hour and still hadn't managed to hit him with a water whip. Feeling those ripples wasn't easy. Water, it turned out, was movement. Yes, she had known that before, known that waterbending was about push and pull and redirection, but she hadn't before experienced how much movement was there. The ocean moved in accordance with the call of the moon, on which the Fire Nation warship bobbed, and the water in the pool itself swirled around as a result of it all. The pool itself was influenced slightly by the moon, as well, and by the wind that caressed the water's surface, by the gravitational pull of the earth deep below the ocean, and even by the beat of Katara's heart and the thrumming of her body as she breathed in and out. Water was the element that was most affected by the world's forces, and water wasn't afraid to hide that. Yet it was the most durable of all elements, because none of those forces could destroy it. Another drop of water ran from the blindfold down the bridge of Katara's nose and hung there on the tip. She snapped into motion, pulling a bit of water from the pool and shifting to send it snapping out as a whip towards what she thought was a source of ripples in the pool. There was a masculine cry of pain. But it wasn't Master Pakku. The laughter that followed belonged to him, though. You came close to putting Sitwok out of commission for a while, Pakku said, referring to one of his students who had been filling the pool before Katara arrived. His voice was coming from somewhere behind Katara. Next time, a little less force would be fine. You just need to tag me, not knock my head off. Katara wiped at the drip of water on her nose. Well, Sitwok shouldn't have been in the pool if he didn't want to get hurt. I had to strike fast to make sure you didn't dodge. Sitwok groaned wordlessly. He's right, Pakku said. He wasn't in the pool. Then what was I aiming at? Well, I can hardly answer that question, can I? I'm a waterbender master, not a mind reader. Still, you were obviously listening to the water, so you did well enough with the exercise. We'll try again tomorrow. For now, I think it's time we had a group exhibition of the basic forms, and then maybe some sparring before we get to our chores on the ship. There was the sound of a body pulling itself out of the water, and Katara focused on the massive chaotic rush of liquid that surged forward to fill the space Pakku had just vacated and then was pummeled by the water that fell back in from his skin and clothes. You can take off your blindfold, now. And then something soft and wide landed on her head, her hat. Katara took the blindfold off to find that night had fully fallen. A red lamp attached to the bridge tower shed light on the rear deck, and she could see the other students abandoning their circular arrangement around the pool. They had been standing like an honor guard around the space, and Sitwook happened to be the one standing where she was facing. Two of the other boys were helping him walk away. Paka was already heading back around the tower to the main deck. Before she got out of the pool, Katara waded forward. She was sure she had felt the ripples in this direction. Paka thought it was enough that she had tried and failed, but she hated the thought that she was such a bad waterbender that she couldn't at least accomplish something tonight. She wanted to be good enough to deserve her rescue, good enough for her tribe, good enough to help Aang and maybe be something more. If she was so bad at this. She halted in place and gasped. A little dragonfly, almost invisible in the dim light of the lap, was resting on the surface of the water. It was right between where she and Sitwook had been standing when she struck. When Aang and all his friends got back to their rooms, they all instinctively assembled in the atrium at the center. Mai, Sokka, Toph, Zuko, and Suki all came out and sat down around the fountain where Appa and Momo were lounging. Aang summoned a wind and used it to hop up on Appa's head and gave the big guy a two-handed rub right on his arrow. That party went great. They had lots of vegetarian food for me and everyone was so friendly. Governor Hij even said he'd take me on a tour of some nearby villages tomorrow so I can meet regular Fire Nation people. Sokka stared to say, but Momo fluttered over and landed on his chest, immediately reaching towards the front pockets. Sokka squealed, "Hey, what are you? I was saving those for later." Momo jumped to the ground with one arm wrapped around what looked like a bunch of fried dough balls, already chewing one. Sokka growled, but then slumped and turned his attention back to Aang. "I was going to say that I kind of agree with you. Everyone clapped after your story, so I guess they didn't object to the overall save the world and let's be happy message." Mai yawned. "Well, don't read too much into that. For a nation of world-conquering jerks, we're very good at being polite at parties. But yeah, as boring as it all was, things could have gone badly and didn't, so I guess it's a victory or something." Aang nodded. If even Mai couldn't say anything worse than boring, then things were pretty good. He looked over to Zuko and said, "Do you want to come with me on the tour tomorrow?" Zuko seemed surprised to be addressed, his eye widening momentarily. No. I should there are some letters I need to write. I should do that tomorrow." "Oh. Okay." Aang looked over to Toph. "How about you?" "Sure, why not?" She raised a hand to point directly at Zuko. "Also, Princey Pants just lied to you. He can't come because he's going to find his mom's village near the center of the island." Before Aang could even blink, Zuko was on his feet and stomping towards Toph, growling, "Why you little dash?" Suki was the first to react, hopping up and stepping in Zuko's way. The prince didn't stop until he collided with her, but Suki held her ground and wound up pretty much holding Zuko in place. Aang slid down from Appa's head. "Your mother lives on this island." Zuko continued to glare at Toph. "I don't have to explain anything to you people. I'll do my part in Uncle's plan, and that's all you need to know." Mai stood up as well, walking over to stand in Zuko's path right behind Suki. "Zuko, what's this about your mother? I thought that she was gone." Zuko turned his glare on her for a moment, and then bit out, "I just learned that mother may have been born on this island. In a village called Hirae. I am going to investigate that claim tomorrow, and I won't let any of you stop me." Aang considered that. "We need to talk to all these governors, to see if we can get them to support Prince Iroha's coup, but I guess we can do without you for a few days. If you need to look into this to be at peace, then it's best for you to go as soon as possible." An idea struck him, and he turned to look at Appa. "Hey, buddy, do you want to take Zuko to this village? You won't have to fly very fast or in any danger, and you can take breaks whenever you need to." Appa gave an assenting grunt and sniffled. "Great. Thanks. This will really help us." Aang reached and gave Appa's nose a pat. "What?" Zuko finally stepped back from Suki, looking at Aang with clear confusion. "You're just going to let me take your sky bison?" Aang shrugged. "Well, Appa is okay with it, so sure. I figured Suki is going with you, and she saw how to hold the reins when we were on Kyoshi Island." A thought occurred to him. "You're not scared of Appa, are you?" Zuko shook his head. I've never flown before, but he seemed friendly enough on Crescent Island. Wait, what? You met Appa on Crescent Island? After images of their confrontation in that abandoned temple flood through Aang's memory. It hadn't given him a good impression of the prince, but he and Mai had never found out what happened to Zuko after Aang was consumed by the Avatar state. It hadn't been a good night for anyone. Zuko nodded. When I woke up after the volcano's eruption, I was down on the shores of the island. Your sky bison flew over to investigate me, and I told him you were probably up in the ruins of the temple and pointed the way. I wasn't sure if he'd understand me, but well, Zuko trailed off as Appa shuffled over to him and gave him a big lick. Aang felt a smile growing. Anyone who was nice to Appa couldn't be all bad. He was feeling better and better about this whole plan. Then it's settled. Even taking breaks, Appa will get you to Hira and back faster than any carriage, and then we can get back to convincing the governors. Zuko tried to wipe the bison spit off his armor, while Suki stepped back with a giggle so that she was standing next to Mai. Zuko flung some of the gooey saliva to the ground and nodded to Aang. Thank you, Avatar. Sure, no problem. Toph snorted. See, that wasn't so hard. Now let's talk about how you're obviously being baited by that Heihachi weapon girl with Mai's fashion sense. Aang blinked. Baited. Suki blinked. Heihachi. Mai blinked. My fashion sense? That trash wears all black and can barely be bothered to comb her hair. Zuko swung and almost started stomping towards Toph again, but Suki and Mai were still in his way. Do you have a problem, little girl? Toph cracked her knuckles. You may address me as, Your Majesty. And I ain't got a problem, Princey Pants. I'm just looking out for you. Maybe you're not savvy enough to have picked this up yet, but when a girl is all smiles and practically crawls into your lap while whispering long-forgotten facts about mysterious moms, then she's out to get you. Or she's weird. Sokka barked a laugh. Zuko, I didn't realize you had such unique tastes. No wonder Mai ditched you. Aang grinned, too. That's a good one. Suki, however, didn't seem to see the humor. She crossed her arms and threw a look at Toph. She wasn't in his lap. Toph, of course, couldn't see it, but she was grinning anyway. Then Mai stepped away, bringing her hands together in her sleeves and looking up at the moon. Heihachi is a blade master of Kilauea. That has a whole lot of boring meaning behind it, but the important point is that they all use short swords made of volcano glass because it's invisible in the night. They're good fighters, but they have this whole philosophy about fighting with more than just outright combat. It's possible that Heihachi is looking to play politics, here. Or I guess she could be trying to seduce Zuko. Stranger things have happened. Stranger things have happened to me in the last 6 months. Aang Wind hopped over to take Mai's place between Zuko and Toph, just in case, and said, so we should be careful, but I still think Zuko needs to go see this Hira village. Maybe Heihachi's plan is to just try to drive us apart, so the best thing we can do is work together and be honest with each other. Toph nodded. That's exactly what I was trying to do. I like you, Twinkle Toes. Sokka cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. I hate to be the one to have to say it, but Heihachi's whole plan could just be to draw Zuko away to kill him. She could be lying about this village on this island dash. She was telling the truth about that, at least, Toph interrupted. And even if she's not, Zuko will still be vulnerable out away from the rest of us, even with Appa. And Suki, I guess. Suki crossed her arms. You can't keep me away. So if a freaky weapon of the Fire Nation attacks you, Mai said, then Suki and Zuko will both die. Both Suki and Zuko went, hey. Mai shrugged. She's a blade master of Kilauea. I'm not going to lie to make you feel better. Zuko sighed. I won't let myself be drawn into a battle, then. If we're attacked, we'll let the Sky Bison get us to safety, and then figure out another way to investigate Hira. I can contact Azula or F-. He broke off, and then finished with, we can figure something out when the need arises. Aang nodded. He couldn't imagine what kind of family Zuko must have, that he couldn't even rely on his dad or sister to help him figure out why his mother disappeared. And why would his mother even be missing the first place? While what he had seen so far of the Fire Nation itself hadn't been bad, there was obviously something very wrong with the people who ran it. Maybe that could help convince the island governors here to turn against their Fire Lord. Maybe. For now, Aang just said, "So, who wants to be the one to tell the Zhaos not to expect to see Zuko for a few days?" Sokka's hand immediately went into the air as he called, "Not it." Zhao's first morning back in the Fire Nation dawned clear and warm, another auspicious sign that had him almost believing that the whole enterprise wouldn't end up in flame and death. But so long as it ended at flame and death for Zhao's enemies, he could probably deal with that, too. And, he had to admit, this assignment had been fairly easy so far. The Avatar and Prince Zuko had been in the Fire Nation overnight and so far no one had tried to kill them, a very positive sign. And while he would have to continue worrying about such things, one of Zhao's first tasks this morning was to issue orders for the Avatar's military escort for the tour with Governor Hij. He was at least able to do so in a luxurious guest suite in a sprawling mansion. There were worse things. And then, as Zhao was writing out those escort orders, one of the worst things arrived in the form of a page who announced, "Lord Zhao to see you, sir." Yes, there were worse things. Zhao rose from his desk and nodded. "Send him in." Father stepped into the office with his usual placid gait. "Commander Zhao, thank you for seeing me." "Lord Zhao, what can I do for you?" Father kept his voice light as he said, "I was just informed that Prince Zuko is no longer on the premises. Is there a problem?" "No. Prince Zuko was always a problem, but that was hardly Father's business. And at least the prince had sent the strange water tribe boy to inform Zhao of this whole thing. But thank you for asking." Of course, Father wouldn't leave it at that. "Might I inquire as to where the prince is going? It is my responsibility to organize this summit, after all, and even you have to admit that it is odd for one of the guests of honor to simply go missing." "I suppose I do." Zhao certainly hadn't been happy when the water tribe boy showed up last night with news of Zuko's excursion to Hirae, but then he had realized that serving Admiral Iroh loyally didn't mean he necessarily had to succeed at keeping Zuko alive. He only had to try. However, it is a royal affair, and not one that will threaten this gathering. Prince Zuko will be back soon, and the Avatar intends to continue with the planned itinerary. "I see." Father ambled closer as he stroked his long beard. "And since it is a royal matter, no doubt Prince Oze would be informed, or else keenly interested." "Prince Oze? Lord Zhao, are you saying that you might receive inquiries from Prince Oze? I thought you were chosen to oversee this event because you're a neutral party." Father shrugged. "I am neutral enough, not favoring any of our guests over the others. But if you are insinuating that I am exclusively forwarding Oze's agenda, you are wrong. I have received no inquiries yet and will not seek to spread information that I am not asked for. But I have many old friends to whom I owe some favors, and I like to be able to accommodate them when I can." Zhao took a deep breath, trying to cultivate some of that self-control that Zhang Zhang had always tried to teach him. Yet he couldn't help but remember how Father had been in the capital when Zhao had arrived, back when he was plotting to accuse Oze of treason and use Zuko's naivete as proof. Father had even been in possession of a misrouted right meant for Zhao? Or was it misrouted after all? That sneaky old coot. Zhao's voice was hard as he said, "Then tell your old friends that if they want to know, they'll have to hunt down Prince Zuko himself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I do have more important things to do this morning than listen to you whine about your curiosity." Father bowed silently, and let the page lead him out. Well. So much for an easy assignment. Chapter 44, House Ablaze. When Zuko and Suki climbed on the sky bison, "His name is Appa, and he's a good friend," the Avatar had said before wishing them a productive journey. The skies had been clear and the sun was shining. But the winds were strong, and soon Zuko saw clouds coming in over Zenmatsu Island. Those clouds were directly ahead of him. "Looks like rain," Suki said. They were sitting together on the sky bison's, Appa's, head. Suki had the reins, and even with poor weather ahead of them, Zuko didn't miss the gleam in her eyes as she looked out over the sprawling tropical forest and leaned into the wind. For the trip, she and Zuko both had dressed in comfortable red traveling clothes that wouldn't draw attention. Unlike the sky bison they were on. Zuko had always thought Suki's eyes were blue, before now. Yet, seeing her in the casual dress of his homeland, he realized that they were actually a shade of purple. He turned his own good eye back to the skies ahead of them. Can Appa fly through rain? Suki shrugged. Avatar Aang described how he and Appa were caught in a storm 100 years ago, and wound up crashing into one of the southern seas. But if the rain doesn't get heavy, then we should be okay. It will make Appa's fur heavier, so we might need to take more breaks. She leaned down and rubbed her hands through the air-shaped fur between the bison's horns. Sound good, big guy. Appa let out a sound that could have been a war cry or comfortable agreement. Zuko decided to take it as the latter. He still had a hard time making himself believe the Avatar's story about running away from home 100 years ago and surviving in an iceberg to emerge into this world. He accepted the facts as true, but that wasn't the same thing as believing it. In a way, it was much like Zuko's thoughts of his own family. He wasn't sure what he knew about them versus what he believed, either. My father would have to have known that my mother was a peasant when he married her, he found himself saying. It doesn't make sense that he would have found out later and then sent her back home. Suki glanced at him. But it would fit what you remember. Do you know anything about how your parents met? He shook his head. I always believed that it was a standard betrothal, but now that I've been thinking about it, I guess I just assumed it. I can't recall anyone actually telling me about it. Is that how the royal family always marries? By betrothal? Yes. He looked at Suki's eyes again, deciding that the purple shade didn't contrast as sharply with her red clothes as blue would. That's not to say that the royal getting married doesn't have a say. He or she could have someone in mind, and then all the proper agreements could be pursued. But my cousin Lu Ten was betrothed to Mai, and I don't think they had even met before the negotiations started. Anyway, Uncle broke that engagement off for some reason. Maybe he'd tell me, if I got the chance to ask. Suki shrugged. So if I understand betrothals correctly, there's a trade that goes on, right? The person with lower social status needs to provide a dowry of some kind. Zuko nodded. As you might guess, the royal family would be the one receiving the dowry for any betrothal. That's why this idea of my mother being a peasant makes no sense. What could her family have gifted my grandfather to make that match? What did Mai's family pay for her engagement to your cousin? Zuko frowned. Why do you ask? Just curious. Well, even though she didn't know Lu Ten, Mai's family was already close with the rest of us. Zuko paused as he thought about how best to summarize all those details he'd let slumber in the shadows of his mind during his exile. She and Angela were schoolmates. She and a girl named Ty Lee. They were all close friends. But Ty Lee is dead now. Zuko shook his head. He still couldn't believe that another item for the list. Mai's father had made some important contributions to the war effort through his military engineering, and he had been awarded a residence in the capital and membership in the Caldera clan. I guess you could say he was a rising star. Favored. People like that were frequently rewarded with gold, along with other gifts. For the hand of the son of the crown prince of the Fire Nation, I expect that Mai's family would have paid back most of the hoarded gold of their rise. The wind picked up, and Suki pulled the reins to signal Appa to rise above them. It wouldn't have made a difference that Mai was a weapon of the Fire Nation. Zuko shook his head. That didn't happen until after I left. But if the betrothal had been made after Mai was given her rank, I'm not really sure. There are only 9 weapons, well, 8 now that Ty Lee is gone and only Lady Garrel is wed. She married decades before she became a weapon, though. I'm not really sure if it would make a difference. If Mai survives long enough to marry, and gets together with someone from the Fire Nation, and we survive long enough to see it, I guess we'll find out. Suki laughed. Zuko gave her a questioning look. She shrugged. It just sounded funny, the way you explained that we all have to live. Most people would just assume that much. Zuko looked ahead at the approaching clouds. It's not a very safe assumption, considering what we're all trying to do. Aang tugged at the wrap on his head and tried to ignore how the bouncing of the carriage was so different from the gentle bobbing of a sky bison in flight. Mai, seated next to him on the carriage's rear bench, noticed his discomfort. You okay? Aang gave her a smile and a nod. It wasn't a big deal, really. Maybe a little disappointing that he couldn't go out in his nomad robes, but by this point, it was something he was used to. Governor Hidge, sitting opposite Aang on the forward bench next to King Toph, bowed his head. Like most of the Fire Nation big shots they had encountered, Hidge had a mutton-chopped, tri-pronged beard, although it contrasted with his round glasses. I thank you for your discretion on this trip, Avatar. While you are officially welcome as a diplomat, and Commander Zhao's soldiers will be guarding us, we can't be sure that certain elements wouldn't still attempt violence against you. Yeah. Mai sat back in her seat and crossed her arms. I'm still not clear on who these elements are. The Fire Lord knows we're here and nominally approves, so the military won't attack us. The Home Guard answers to the governors. We know there are politics at work, so of course there's the possibility of professional assassins, but they're hardly going to be fooled by a headscarf. Next to Governor Hidge, Toph nodded. She had been allowed to wear her fancy green robes, despite whatever this danger was. Especially since it would be easier to just hit the mansion. Hidge frowned. My mansion is very well guarded. And any security has its holes, Toph interrupted. Trust me, I know it, and don't go pretending you aren't up on it, too. You and Zhao are afraid of something that's a part of the Fire Nation itself. Aang continued to be impressed by the little king. For all that she was kind of rude and loud, she paid close attention to what was going around her. Aang looked to Hidge and offered a smile. It's okay. You can tell us what's wrong. We're not here to judge the Fire Nation, and we understand that some things are just outside of even a governor's control. Hidge leaned back in his seat. That is generous of you, Avatar. But you won't offend me by judging the Fire Nation on this point. The problem is the people of the homeland. Aang felt Mai tense beside him, but she displayed no reaction that Hidge could have noticed as she said, the people. Oh, yes, my lady. You probably aren't aware, living in the caldera, but there are, problems. But it will be easier to show you. We're almost at our first destination, a local club where some of the more affluent members of the Inawaka clan gather. Aang recognized the name of Inawaka as being the name of the port city over which Hidge's mansion stood watch. So this clan was like Mai's Caldera clan, part of the new system where nobles owed loyalty to their home city and governor. The carriage soon slowed to a stop, but Aang knew to wait until a certain pattern of knocking sounded at the passenger compartment's door. When it did, Governor Hidge led everyone out into the summer air. Zhao himself was waiting for them beside their carriage. His own more military transport, an open cart with high sides, was parked just ahead, and his soldiers had already disembarked and were standing on guard around them. The area is secure, Governor, Avatar. You may proceed with your visit. At least it was a nice area. They were within grounds enclosed by a wooden wall, but one that seemed more for decorative purposes than security. It blocked off whatever the wider view was, leaving Aang to look only at the lovely gardens around him, and the pleasure house rising up above them. And it was into the pleasure house the Governor Hidge headed. It was big enough to contain all kinds of gambling and entertainment, but this visit seemed to be more focused. Hidge led the way into a large room where all kinds of people in fancy clothes, all red, of course, were gathered. It was an assembly that Aang could barely tell from the guests at the big dinner the night before, and for all he knew, some of the same people might be here. Still, it was nice how they cheered for him. Then the first of the guests stepped forward, a man in a Fire Navy dress uniform, and approached Mai, and Aang realized that it wasn't him they were cheering for. Lady Caldera Yu Mai, the man said, welcome back to the Fire Nation. And you don't have to share details, but congratulations as well on the completion of whatever secret mission the royal family had you running. I am Vice Admiral Cho, and this is my son, who is currently looking for a wife. Ah, another of the guests said, a woman with grey hair. Lady Mai can talk to your son later, Admiral. We have a gift to welcome you to Inawaka and thank you for gracing our lowly clan with your golden presence. You have our gratitude and service, my lady. She handed Mai what looked like a fancy horn of some kind, and then fell to her knees in a bow. No, not a bow, a full kowtow, with forehead pressed to the floor. In fact, the whole room was kowtowing. Mai stood there, holding her gifted horn, and threw a glance at Aang that to him seemed a little wide-eyed for her. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the musical instrument. Hij shifted so that he was standing directly behind Aang and whispered, the Caldera clan is the most prestigious in the homeland, living around the Fire Lord himself. Each person here is hoping to catch Lady Mai's eye and favor, gambling that she'll remember them for promotion. Aang blinked. That admiral mentioned his son Dash. Yes, a bit forward of him, but there are many parents here hoping to set up a betrothal with an offspring. I suppose he wanted to jump to the front of the line. Aang could only shake his head. Mai was practically being mobbed now, still holding her new horn, but Aang wasn't sure how he could rescue her. Toph leaned towards Aang. She's fine. Just a little anxious, according to her heartbeat and breathing. Don't worry your twinkling toes about it. Aang smiled his thanks, and then realized that he was being approached as well. An old man with long white hair that spilled out over his red robes was walking over, saying, Are you friends with Lady Caldera Mai? How lovely. I am Yingbai, head of the Ying merchant family. Aang put a smile on his face and prepared for a few hours of being the second most important person in the room, for a change. By the time the ski bison, Appa, reached Hirae, the sun was covered by sheets of grey clouds that drizzled over the landscape, a warm, muggy wetness that wasn't quite soaking Zuko's clothes even as it left his hair and skin slick. Or rather, it was by the time they reached Hirae charred remains. The first sign that something was wrong was the forest. The growth on Zenmatsu was all thick and lush, encroaching strongly on the rocky landscape pushed up by volcano activity, but as Appa had carried Zuko and Suki further on their journey, they found the foliage below suddenly thinning. The trunks and branches of the tall trees were more visible, with most of the green coming from short growth on the ground rather than leaves on the trees. There were also many fallen trunks, all of them blackened and missing branches. The forest continued to grow thinner, the surviving trees reaching up as scattered sentinels dwarfed by the massive rock spires dotting the landscape, until it disappeared entirely. Lake beds sat empty despite the rain falling even now, while what seemed like stone monuments of some kind sat split and blackened beyond any kind of recognition. Thankfully, what was left wasn't an ashland. Most likely, the cause had been a natural forest fire. That distinction hadn't saved Hirae. The remains of the village didn't seem to have been touched since it burned down. Pieces of the frames of some of the buildings still stood, and if they were anything to go by, the people here had lived in comfortable, spacious homes. There even seemed to be the ruins of a theater, or at least a stage, in the center of the village. Hirae had probably been a nice place to live. No one lived here now. Suki was silent as she brought Appa down. Zuko was thankful for that, because he had no idea what he was supposed to be feeling, never mind how to communicate it. Why hadn't Heihachi said anything about this? It was possible she didn't know, and come to think of it, Zuko hadn't explicitly said he was coming to visit, he had just asked about Hirae location. Or else this was what he was meant to find. But why? There were no answers here. As soon as Appa had landed, Zuko slid off the bison's head and rushed over to the nearest set of ruins. The ground squelched beneath his boots, and the rain seemed to be growing heavier, but Zuko just increased his breathing and pushed the energy into his inner fire to generate more body heat. Up close, he could see the stone of what must have been the base of this home's fire pit, but nothing else was recognizable in the mud and debris and... Wait. There was something half-buried that was too regular in shape. It seemed long and thin, like a rod of some kind. No. Zuko stepped back so that he was no longer standing within the remnants of the home. That had been a bone. A human bone. He heard Suki coming up behind him. He turned so that he could see her with his remaining eye, but once again he didn't know what to say. She nodded. We don't know how many got away. If they were living off the forest or something else that was ruined, then there would be no reason to come back so soon. As ever, she was good with logic. She could figure things out. Zuko, at least, was good at pushing further on his path. Let's get back to the bison. Maybe we can find another settlement, or at least some people who can tell us what happened. That was the worst experience of my whole life, Mai said as they were getting back into the carriage. She plopped down on the rear bench and let the golden horn tumble out of her hands to the floor. Aang hopped into the seat beside her. Worse than Crescent Island, and the sinkhole, and all those boat rides you got seasick on. She extended her arm and flicked his ear. Clearly that was an objective and precise evaluation. Don't question me. Toph sniffed as she got back to her own seat in the forward bench. You two are gross. Does it smell to anyone else like some rain is coming? Governor Hidge was the last to board, closing the door to the passenger compartment behind him. They were in motion soon after. Ah, you tolerated that very well, Lady Mai. And don't worry, you'll be safely anonymous for the rest of our activities today. I just couldn't scrape together enough of the upper crust here without saying who they'd be meeting, and frankly you are more of a draw than even the Avatar. These people aren't looking to control the fate of the homeland, you see, they just want to move up to a more prominent clan and residence. Aang slumped at the return of the serious discussion. He much preferred to tease Mai, but he knew his responsibilities. That's part of what I don't get. Your cities define your clans, now, right? But what's the point of being part of a clan, if no one has any real loyalty to it? Hidge smiled and pushed his glasses further up his nose. You are truly wise, young Avatar. Yes, that's exactly part of the problem. The clan system was already decaying when the Fire Lord reorganized it, but now it's just a way of measuring social standing. The closer a clan is to the Fire Lord, the more prominent. I'm the least of all the governors, here on Zenmatsu, the furthest of the outer islands. Perhaps I had any hope of being promoted and surviving the experience, I'd be more invested in Ajalan's games. Mai inhaled sharply. That's why it was so easy to arrange Zuko's homecoming here. You're fine hosting the Avatar, no matter how many Fire Nation fortresses he's knocked over, because it draws attention and power here that you wouldn't normally get. Hidge shrugged. Not a bad guess, but not quite the truth. Of course, I'm more than happy to do a favor to both Prince Iroh and Prince Ozai at the same time. But chasing an appointment closer to the capital island will do me little good until the flow of power moves in the proper directions. The clan system needs to be reformed, and well, we're on our way to see the next problem. We won't be as close, but I think what you see will be illuminating. Aang wasn't enjoying this tour as much as he had hoped. He had expected getting a taste of modern Fire Nation culture, like seeing a festival or trying some food or learning the new dances. Instead, he was getting a lesson on how the Fire Nation was slowing killing itself. But the fact that Hidge was revealing all of this meant that he wanted it to be fixed. And he thought Aang might be able to help. That was probably good news. At least, Aang hoped it was. The rain began coming down harder, and Zuko's search slowed. The problem was the sky bison. Avatar Aang said that Appa was struck by your sister's lightning, Suki explained. Katara healed the physical damage with her waterbending, but apparently lightning does more than just cook flesh. Appa has to take it easy and rest often so that his energies rebalance. Zuko remembered the incident, of course. It was when June had tracked the Avatar to that cargo ship, and he and Azula had stolen a speedboat to intercept them before they got away. The irony, that his relentless drive to capture the Avatar was now interfering with his quest to discover his mother's fate, was not lost on him. By the time they found any answers about Hira, the sky bison's fur was soaked through and he smelled like the world's biggest nest of rats. Zuko had to concentrate on his breathing in order to maintain enough of his inner fire to keep himself warm. Suki didn't have any such advantages, and she didn't object when Zuko put an arm around her shoulders so that she could share his heat. The traveling merchant they found was making do with a simple, practical umbrella, oh, yes, Hira. Used to stop by a sell to M. Simple stuff, cause they didn't have much coin, and I'd do some metalworking fixes. Zuko pointed the way. It's all gone now. The forest, the village, everything. Yup. Forest fire, they says. Some kind a lightning storm in the forest. People said they'd see weird lights in those woods. Could been lightning what do call it phenomenon. Or evil spirits. Only they says spirits ain't the business simple folk. Zuko waved the matter away. What about the people? Fires took em by a surprise. Some got caught in their homes. Most got away. Scattered around to other villages. Do you know if a woman named Ursa might have been among the refugees? Never heard that name, myself. Sorry. Zuko turned away. He heard Suki offering thanks to the merchant, and approved, but he didn't trust himself to deal with niceties right now. His search for his mother was at a dead end. If she even really was from Hirae, and if she returned there after leaving the palace that night, then she might have survived the fire and moved to another of the villages here. Assuming she was among the survivors. But tracking her down would involve methodically visiting all the surrounding settlements and asking around. It could take weeks, and was too dependent on his mother letting herself be found, using her real name. He had a feeling it wouldn't be even that easy. And he had his obligations to Uncle Iroh. This business with the Avatar. He wanted to just forget about it all, and if there had been a clear trail to his mother, that would be one thing. But this was too tenuous, and Uncle had helped Zuko return to the Fire Nation. Besides, a drawn-out search would keep from getting all the way home. Father was waiting. Suki came up and put her hand on his back. Let's go check Hirae again. Maybe we can find some clues. It's on our way back, anyway. We can use it as chance to let Appa rest. Zuko nodded. It was better than nothing. He hoped. The carriage came to a stop, but Aang could still hear some kind of noise coming into the passenger compartment. Is that rain? Ugh. Mai clasped her hands in her sleeves. I hate getting wet. Tell me someone brought an umbrella. Governor Hidge opened the slats on the windows, revealing their destination beneath grey skies and a light drizzle. It looked to Aang to be a fairly typical Fire Nation village square, like the kind he and his friend Kuzan had played in during their visits. He saw shops and residences, and a metal statue in the center of a person in some kind of fancy armor. Near the statue, some of the home guard, the more lightly armored police forces that answered to each island's governor, were setting up a large tent over wooden supply boxes. Hidge closed the shutters again. Well, I wasn't planning on having us leave the carriage, anyway. It's better for us to observe from a distance. We can stay in here out of the rain. Hey. King Toph sat forward. What about me? I need my feet on good, solid earth to see anything. Mai picked up her golden horn from the floor and set it on top of Toph's head by its wide bell, almost like a hat. There you go. Aang cringed and waited for an outburst, but Toph just tilted her head to the left, and then to the right, and grinned. That works. Do I look good? Mai said, you appear very royal. Sweet. I'll just watch from this side, then. Toph opened the door nearest her, and eased herself down to the ground. The whole carriage would be between her and the village square, but that wouldn't stop her earth sense. Hidge cleared his throat. Well, with that resolved, let's begin our own observations, yes. He opened the shutters again, and Aang inched over to see. Her heard Mai shifting on the bench behind him, and then she pressed up against his back as she angled for a view. He could feel, even though he had a scarf over his baldness and Mai wasn't actually touching it, that her head was hovering just above his. He resolved not to let himself get distracted. As Aang watched, the home guard soldiers struck a gong they had set up in their tent, and people began shuffling out of their homes. They didn't seem happy, or at all eager. Maybe it was because the rain was picking up. Two of the home guard brought out what seemed like a large, wood-backed sign. Aang squinted, and could make out what seemed to be a bearded face on it. Fire Lord Ajalon, Hidge whispered. All of the people fell into kowtows before the image. After a few minutes, a big-bellied man of home guard stepped up and bellowed, "You may rise." The people did so, and the picture was taken away. The big guard continued, "That does not count towards your daily total. You must still bow before the portraits of the Fire Lord in your home's pictures generously provided to you by our glorious leader in celebration of his matchless leadership one more time today." Hidge nodded. "Once before every meal?" The big guard held out his hand, and a scroll was put into it by one of his compatriots. "Before we get to our special business today, we have a matter to settle. Citizen Azuding, step forward." The crowd gasped. The people began moving away from one man, who started shaking. Aang frowned. "I don't have a good feeling about this." Hidge hissed, "Don't interfere. There will be no loss of life, and you'll just make things worse if you try to stop it." That didn't set Aang at ease, but he kept watching. The shaking man came up to the tent of his own accord. Two of the home guard forced him down to his knees, and stood at attention on either side of him. The big guard bellowed, "Citizen Tang, please step forward." A little boy hurried up out of the crowd. The big guard held out his hand again, and like the scroll before, he was now given a small leather bag. The big guard walked up to the child and passed on the bag, narrating to the crowd, "You are a god boy, Tang. You have done well to reveal your father's crime. Zuding failed to bow 3 times to Fire Lord Ajalin 2 weeks ago, supposedly too tired from working to get to his knees for the leader who won our honorable war of conquest. This is a terrible act of disrespect to the man who owns all of us, who by his grace and generosity gives us work and shelter and honor. Tang has been rewarded with candy, fine treats made in the capital, for his honesty and loyalty. Zuding will receive the standard punishment for his first transgression." He nodded. The 2 guards on either side of Zuding freed bamboo rods from sheaths on their back, and one struck Zuding across the shoulders. Then the other did, then the first again. Aang moved for the carriage's door. Enhij grabbed his wrist. "I have ordered as much mercy to be shown as possible." The man was not stripped of his shirt, and I emphasized that he was to be given the appropriate punishment for his first offense. If you interfere, his punishment will be more severe. Aang yanked his hand free. "You could stop this." "Could I? Remember what we saw of the people in my clan, crawling over each other to ingratiate themselves with someone from the caldera? If I tried to circumvent the Fire Lord's law, the nobles here would do to me what that boy did to his father. I would be punished, a new governor would be put in my place, that man would be killed, and you would be a criminal in the Fire Nation." Aang didn't know what to say. Thankfully, Mai stepped in with, "That stinks." Aang nodded, and turned back to the window. The guards were still striking Zuding, but then the one on the left seemed to trip out of nowhere with such force that his bamboo rod flew out of his hands to land in the crowd. Through the windows on the opposite side of the compartment, Aang could hear Toph whistling nonchalantly. He grinned. That was some nice earthbending. Back at the gathering, the big guard shook his head and bellowed, "All right, that's enough. Let's get down to our real business." Fire Lord Ajalin, in his continuing generosity, has found a way to enhance his people's education. We will be collecting the storybooks handed out 2 years ago, Glorious Victories of the Fire Army, and in exchange we will give you a new volume written by the Fire Lord himself, The Victorious Life and Times of Fire Lord Ajalin. Families will read this book together every night after your shared meal. Children are encouraged to memorize it. Step forward, one at a time, and trade the old book for the new book. Don't get it wet. And no shoving. As Zuding was dragged away, the other guards broke open the crates within the tent and pulled out stacks of new books. Hij whispered, "I received the orders and materials for this just a few days ago, and rushed to pass them on to the home guard. I wanted you, Avatar, to see what the Fire Lord has been doing over the last few years. He demands more and more devotion from the people, stealing reverence from our nation. He's building a cult to himself, and I shudder to think what he needs it for. Something must be done to restore balance to Fire Nation rule. And I have hopes that you, Avatar, can find a way to do this." This was even worse than Aang thought. He knew he'd have to combat favor for the Fire Nation's war, but a nationwide cult to Fire Lord Ajalin? On the other hand, this seemed to be fairly recent, and was obviously not liked by a man like Hij. If Zhao and Iroh were any indication, the military wasn't too happy, either. Maybe this could be a chance to easily get the rest of the Fire Nation's leadership to support Prince Iroh. For now, Aang figured that mentioning Iroh's plan might not be the smartest thing to do. "I understand. With the support of you the governors, maybe I can do something." Hij smiled and pushed his glasses up higher. Then the whole carriage around Aang flipped and flew and crashed, and the air vibrated with the force and sound of an explosion. Perhaps it was Zuko's imagination, but he thought the rain had lessened again when they finally made it back to Hirae. Even so, he almost missed the large beast standing amidst the ruins of the village. From their position in the sky, atop Appa's head, the creature's hide blended all too well with the shadowy mud of the ground. Suki spotted it first, letting go of the reins to point. "Look, there's something moving down there." It took a few moments, but Zuko was able to make out a long snake-like body, maybe the same length as Appa but much thinner. It seemed to remaining in one position, although its head kept twitching towards something. Is there something else down there? Suki squinted, wrapped Appa's reins around her left arm as an anchor, and then leaned straight over the side of the sky bison's head. I think there's a person moving around. A scavenger come to pick over the detritus of a village that burned to the ground years ago? No. Zuko refused to believe that someone else had come here the same day of his own visit. Take us down. As fast as you can. Suki climbed back up onto Appa's head, and then directed the sky bison into a dive. As soon as Zuko judged the distance safe, he leaped off of Appa's head towards the robed figure, his fists blazing with flame. The last thing he was expecting was for the stranger to whip around to face him before he even completed his leap, or for his forearms to suddenly grow cold and his flames to die. He landed in a tumble, sliding through the mud. Zuko! Suki's cry came just before the sound of her own boots splashing in the mud, and he guessed that she was coming to his aid. He tried to warn her off, but before he could, the stranger's arms snapped, and a massive gout of flame shot out. Zuko reached, trying to steal control of the fires before they could hit Suki, but he slipped in the mud again and fell face-first. He could do nothing but flounder as the fires landed right in front of Suki, cutting her off. Enough, a harsh, elderly voice called out. Zuko recognized it. Lady Caldera Ugaril. The blindfolded weapon of the Fire Nation? Zuko peered through the rain with his good eye, and sure enough, Lady Garil was standing there steaming. She wasn't wearing the formal robes he had only seen her in before now, instead dressed in thicker and plainer clothes appropriate to traveling on a rainy day. She still had her blindfold on, though, and it was still marked with the painted character for dragon. Zuko got to his feet and tried to wipe some of the mud off his clothes. As a prince of the Fire Nation, I demand to know what you are doing here. Lady Garil didn't so much as twitch. I cannot tell you. What? Perhaps you didn't understand. I just issued a royal command. I know, Prince Zuko. I am under obligations that prevent me answering you. Zuko blinked. What kind of obligations? He looked around, and saw the large beast Suki had spotted from the sky, an eelhound, the fastest riding animal in the world. That explained how Garil could have gotten here today without borrowing a sky bison. But why here, eh? Suki splashed over to stand beside Zuko. Lady Garil, I believe. And, evidently, you're a firebender. Garil didn't turn to face Suki, of course, but she did say, and you are the bodyguard who has been protecting the prince. Odd that you would let him make the first strike against an unknown enemy. Zuko flicked some of the mud off his hands. Neither friends nor bodyguards let me do anything. Suki snorted. Yeah, it's not like he gave me a chance to stop him. But I'm curious, Lady Garil, you're obviously an excellent firebender, if you could defend yourself so easily. Tell me, can you make lightning, like Zuko's sister? Garil didn't answer. Zuko was confused. Why would Suki ask about lightning? The merchant had said that the forest fire was started by a lightning storm. The fire had destroyed the village. Ruined his mother's trail. And Garil had refused to answer why she was here. Zuko's fists clenched again as he whirled to face the weapon. It was you. You destroyed the forest. You started the fires. Garil sighed. I was hoping to avoid this. It was as good as a confession, as far as Zuko was concerned. Why did you do it? Tell me. I cannot, Prince Zuko. My obligations still stand. Those obligations again. What could she mean by that? The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. You were ordered to. Someone sent you to do this. Someone who outranks me. There weren't many people who could countermand Zuko's royal orders as a prince, and all of them were members of his own family. Garil sighed. Don't jump to conclusions, Your Highness. As a weapon, I serve only the Fire Lord, and even when I follow the commands of others, I do so as part of my services to your grandfather. I wouldn't disclose the secrets of the lowliest peasant, if I learned them while doing my duty as a weapon. Then maybe I'll just have to make you tell me. He took a fire-bending stance. Garil didn't move. Zuko tried to punch a fireball at her, but even as the flames formed around his fist, Geralt snapped with a grabbing motion, and a chill once again exploded from within his forearm and the flames snuffed out. She caught his now harmless fist, and shoved with enough strength to tip him backwards into the mud again. As he fell, he saw Suki silently throw a kick at Geralt's head, but the older woman seemed to have started dodging even as the attack was first unfolding. She ducked beneath it and slid a foot out to create a burst of flame that made the mud beneath Suki explode and knock her off her own feet. Zuko started to get up, but found a wall of flame extending from Geralt's fists to blot out the sky just above him. He let himself drop again and managed to avoid having his face burned off, but boiling drops of rain passed through the flame to pelt him. He rolled as fast as he could out of the way, and above the squelching of the mud heard the sound of flesh striking flesh and Suki crying out. Zuko finally reached safety and scrambled to his feet, raising his arms in preparation to meet Geralt's next attack. But the old woman was just standing there, standing with one leg resting on top of Suki, the buddy boot planted right on her stomach. Yet Geralt wasn't aiming a fist or even a finger at Suki. The weapon merely nodded. "Both of you need to stop this. You're tired and wet and cold. I can sense your warm blood moving in preparation for your movements before you've even finished the thought. And I am a weapon of the Fire Nation. I do not feel the rain if I do not wish it. You cannot win, and I have no wish to hurt either of you." Zuko let himself slump. Geralt wasn't wrong. "I have to know why you did what you did. Who gave you the order? This is not something you can beat out of me, Prince Zuko. Please, remember your dignity and honor." "Dignity? Honor? Yes. That was it. You're right. This is no time or place for a fight." Geralt's face twitched beneath her blindfold. "What are you? I challenge you to an Agni Kai. Tomorrow at sunset, back at the governor's mansion. If I lose, I will give up on my search. But if I win, you will tell me who demanded the destruction of this village. Prince Zuko You cannot refuse. Suki is my witness. I am calling your honor into question. No true warrior of the Fire Nation should destroy one of our villages, or kill your own countrymen. I did not mean to destroy the village." Geralt shifted so that Suki was no longer underfoot, and she was finally directly facing Zuko. "I only wanted to destroy the forest. The village, it was an unfortunate bit of collateral damage. But it was under threat from spirits anyway. I might have even saved the survivors." Rationalizations. "I accuse you of having no honor. Restore it by giving me the name, or let the fire decide tomorrow in a duel." He glared at Geralt, his one eye against a face with both its eyes covered. She gave short, sharp sigh. "Congratulations, Your Highness. You have trapped me. For your own sake, please give up the challenge. I have no wish to kill you, and an Agni Kai is to a death blow, if not death itself. As this village proves, my control is not complete. No one's is." Zuko shook his head, sending mud and rainwater flying. "You won't have to worry about it on my account. I do not intend to lose." "Teenagers." Geralt let her shoulders slump. "Then I have no choice but to accept. Tomorrow at sunset, then." She turned and began striding back to her eelhound. Then she stopped, and without turning, called out, "I can give you one name, Your Highness, Heihachi. She's the one who manipulated us both into this situation. If you die tomorrow, I will always credit her with the kill." Geralt continued to her eelhound, climbed into the saddle, and with a twitch of the beast's reins, raced off into the storm. Zuko stood there in the rain, letting the mud wash off of him. Eventually, Suki came over to him. Zuko hesitated, looking at her, afraid of the disapproval he knew had to be in her expression. But he would not let himself become a coward. He forced himself to turn his remaining eye on her. Suki, it turned out, was smirking beneath a coating of mud. "Zuko, you're too clever by half." Well, it was better than being called an idiot. It might even be true. Aang was having trouble making sense of the world. He had been sitting in the carriage, watching the exchange of official Fire Nation storybooks outside. There had been a light rain giving a warm humidity to the air. Now, he was lying on the passenger compartment's ceiling. He smelled burning nearby, and something heavy with both soft and really hard sharp bits was on top of him. No, Someone. Mai groaned and pushed herself off of Aang. He helped her to her knees. Are you okay? She blinked once, and he saw her eyes focus on him. Yes. You. I think so. She nodded, and then her eyes flicked elsewhere. Hij is out and we're on fire. Aang turned, and found Hij lying in heap on the other side of the compartment, which was upside down. Behind him, what had been the shuttered windows was now a gap covered in flames, like a flaming hoop at a circus, but with more smoke. Mai said, "You get the governor. Be careful with him. He's not moving." "Okay. What are you going to do?" She grinned, drew a pair of razor discs from her sleeves, and lunged straight through the flames. Yikes. But she passed through quickly and was lost to sight. She was probably okay. Depending on what she found out there. Now that he was focusing, Aang was aware of the sound of echoing cracks coming from outside the carriage. They sounded like explosions of some kind. Was someone attacking? Okay, that was a dumb question. Of course someone was attacking. And the best way to deal with an attack was to not be there. Aang crawled over to Hij, and was dismayed to find blood streaming down the governor's face. His glasses were gone. Aang searched through the white hair, and sure enough found a large gash. Head wounds bled easily, so it was hard to tell how bad it was, but Hij was out cold. That wasn't good. Still, Aang had to get him out of here. Rather than go out through the flames like Mai, Aang summoned a thin, tight burst of air and threw it at the shuttered windows on opposite wall. They exploded outward, and Aang heaved Hij onto his back and ran out before the dust and wood fibers could settle. He emerged into a battlefield in the middle of a village. Bodies of Fire Nation soldiers were laying everywhere, and the buildings around them were missing chunks. The air shuddered with an explosion every other second, but Aang couldn't immediately tell where they were coming from. He put Hij on the ground and looked around the other side of the carriage, and found Mai and Toph fighting someone in the village square. Their opponent was a tall figure in a hooded robe, and as Aang watched, Mai threw a group of razors at his head, but the man raised an arm and the razors bounced off, leaving the sleeve shredded to reveal a forearm made of metal. Then a beam of light shot out from beneath the hood to strike the ground at Mai's feet. A second later the spot exploded. Mai was tossed into the air. Toph raced by on a speeding ramp of stone and caught Mai in her arms. Aang breathed a sigh of relief. And he was starting to figure out what was going on. He stretched his arms out and waved them around his body, pulling the air into a swirling wind. It resisted him, so heavy with humidity, but he swept a foot across the ground in front of him at the same speed and added that to the summoning motion. The wind obeyed, forming around him in a swirl. Then he kept spinning. More spinning. One more moment. Aang pulled his arms in close to his body, shaped an invisible ball with his hands right in front of his stomach, and stopped his spinning so that he was facing the burning carriage, pulling one of his legs up to fold in front of his arms. Then he threw his leg and arms out all at once, unleashing the winds he had been gathering like a massive wall. They slammed against the carriage, and for all its weight, it was free-moving and completely independent of the ground that it was resting on, so when the wall of wind hit it, the path of least resistance was to simply let the air give it a push. A pretty hard push. And so the carriage flew forward to crash just about where the freaky guy in the robe was standing. Then Aang called out, "Let's get out of here." Because even if he had just gotten a direct hit, the carriage wasn't moving quite fast enough to do major damage against a guy that big, never mind what kind of abilities he might have if he could think explosions at people. The villagers, at least, seemed to have all vacated the area. Aang didn't spot any soldiers, either the fully armored types who had been part of the security detail or the home guard who weren't lying on the ground. Toph was riding her stone ramp over to him, Mai firmly in hand. Then a wide cart raced up beside Aang, pulled by roaring Komodo rhinos, with none other than Commander Zhao on the driver's bench. The cart was empty, and Aang realized this was what the soldiers of the security detachment had been traveling in all day. "Get in," Zhao barked. "What about the village?" Aang said as he lifted Hij again and hopped into the cart. "I'll send reinforcements," Zhao growled as Toph and Mai hopped aboard. They were still all standing when Zhao whipped the reins, and the rhinos pounded into a run with enough force to knock them all off their feet. Aim twisted so that he wouldn't fall on Hij, and instead wound up landing on both Mai and Toph instead. None of them seemed inclined to move. Aim was fine with that. So, he said, anyone know what that was about? Toph groaned. I felt the guy stomping up to the village. I think he has a metal foot. He was staring at your carriage and seemed to be concentrating on it. I got all suspicious, so when he shoved his head forward and his heart made this big thud, I lifted a rock shield and tipped the carriage out of the way. So you only wound up getting partially blown up. Oh. Thanks. That explained part of the experience, at least. Why was that guy able to think explosions at us? My side. You know how I said that Piandao is the most dangerous weapon of the Fire Nation? This is the guy who doesn't let him get lazy. He has a weird fire-bending technique that lets him shoot a ray of light and blow up what it hits. And yes, he's definitely still alive and dangerous, even after getting hit by a carriage. What's his name? He renounced it as part of his training. I only know him as the disciple of the Third Eye. Catchy, snorted Toph. So now someone is trying to kill us. Someone, Zhao called back from the front of the cart, was always trying to kill you. Several someones, probably. Now we're just aware of one more of them. Ain couldn't argue with that logic, so he just laid there with his friends as Zhao drove the cart back to Hij's mansion. It was only his second day in the Fire Nation, and already they were dealing with a crisis. But then, that probably shouldn't be a surprise. Chapter 45, Fire Meetings. This is important news about Zuko. Angela crossed her arms and glared at the guards in front of her father's suite, wishing she had taken the time to put on some makeup and perhaps a touch of combat armor. Making people fear for their lives was all about the proper presentation. My father needs this information. The guard, for his part, utterly failed to be impressed by a 15-year-old girl in a robe and ponytail throwing out orders hours before dawn, despite the fact that Angela was quite sure on this point the 15-year-old girl in question could kill him. I am sorry, Your Highness. Prince Oze's orders are very clear. He is not to be disturbed by anyone until he announces in the morning that he is ready. Angela really did consider killing the man his affront, or at least incapacitating him and stepping on his face a little. She had already cut down loyal Fire Nation warriors in the process of freeing Zuko from Zhao's prison, and one more certainly wouldn't trouble her. However, this particular warrior was operating under Father's orders, and if Angela went against those orders, Father might be upset with her. Angela did not want her father upset with her. This was urgent news that demanded immediate attention even though it was still several hours before dawn, but she always did everything that her father commanded. But Father might also be upset in morning when he found out that Angela had not woken him up to hear this news. Whether she let the matter rest until he could deal with it, or tried to take things into her own hands now, she ran the risk of being disappointing. This was a dilemma. Angela normally cherished dilemmas as a chance to exhibit her true genius, but not in the dead of the night after being woken from a dream by a messenger. If only there was some other avenue to Father's. Oh. There was indeed someone. This would not be fun, but Angela refused to become a disappointment. Without a word to the guard, she spun on her bare heel and stalked down the hall of the palace's residential floor. This high up in the tower, only the royal family was supposed to be living in the various suites, but as a practical matter, it was helpful to keep a few important servants close at hand. Angela headed for these rooms, almost all unoccupied given the minimal amount of royal family available these days, to one particular door. It was locked, of course. Angela did not let that stop her, of course. However, she made a tactical mistake, no doubt due to the obscene hour. The flaming kick that destroyed the door also ruined her night vision, and when the blue fire faded, she was blind for a moment. In that brief time, there was the sound of movement within the room, the whisper of air being sliced by something sharp, and then Angela felt the tip of a sword pressed lightly against her throat. She held very still. "It's me, you Claude." "Princess Angela," Piandao said from somewhere in the darkness. "My apologies. You startled me." The blade was removed from Angela's throat. Detonating my door made for a rather tense awakening, as I'm sure you can imagine. How can I help you at this late hour? Or perhaps early hour? I'm so sorry an old man like you can't get a full night's sleep, but a messenger woke me up with news that Zuko is going to be fighting an Agni Kai at sunset today against a weapon of the Fire Nation. Father's guards won't let me pass on the message, and so here we are. Are you going to help me deal with this, or shall I inform my father that you're being even more useless than usual? Consider me at your service. Light exploded into the darkness, revealing Piandao leaning over a small lamp with a pair of spark rocks. He was like a living shadow in his dark robe as he gestured her into the space. There was little furniture, besides the cot, but the walls were decorated with paintings, and a few shelves on the wall boasted such oddities as a rock, carved wooden trinkets, and even a glass bowl full of what seemed to be swimming minnow frogs. Who is Prince Zuko's opponent? Lady Caldera Ugaril. Azula came in, kicking charred pieces of the door out of the way with her bare feet. According to a wire from your spy at the Zenmatsu gathering, Zuko went out on a mysterious jaunt with Suki and the Avatar's Sky Bison. Garil disappeared at some point while he was out. Zuko came back claiming that he had an official duel, and Garil confirmed it when she returned. I have no doubt that Zuzu will lose, but we have to keep him from real harm. How kind of you to look after your brother. Azula frowned. This has nothing to do with kindness. Father will be displeased if Zuko is so much as injured. If only she could speak with Father right now. She'd never tried to visit him at such an hour, and so had never before been refused access. She didn't like it. How quickly can one of us get transport to Zenmatsu Island? Piandao frowned in the lamplight. I'm not sure. It would certainly be a race, even if a sufficiently speedy watercraft is readily available. But what would we do when we get there? Did Prince Zuko issue the challenge, or Lady Garil? It was Zuko. No, Piandao was right, Zuzu would never give up a challenge of honor. Then whoever goes will simply have to kill Garil. Piandao barked a laugh. Just kill one of the greatest firebenders who ever lived. What, you don't think you can? Oh, I think I would probably win such a fight, but it would not be a quick or easy thing. And then someone would have to explain why a known agent of your father is trying to murder a respected national hero. That was a fair point. But if it was a matter of known agents of father. Piandao nodded at something in her expression. I thought so. Prince Oze was the one who had the disciple of the third eye attack the Avatar. Azula inhaled sharply in surprise. How did he Lord Zhao? You got a copy of his report. Well, he was my friend before he became our spy. But he couldn't tell me why Prince Oze wanted the Avatar dead. Azula considered telling him to shut his servant mouth, but really, if he knew this much, a little more information would hardly be a problem. And Piandao already knew many dangerous things. The Avatar, as well as this runt Earth King and my dash. She took a moment to forcibly unclench her jaw. All of them are complicit in this scheme of uncles. It's endangering Zuko, so father decided that they needed to be punished. When we heard from Lord Zhao they were going out without Zuzu, it was too good an opportunity to pass up. Unfortunately, it didn't work, but we'll just have to try again sometime. Piandao's eyebrows rose at that. Azula said, do you have a problem with father making use of another weapon of the Fire Nation? Of course not, Your Highness. To be honest, my real worry is Prince Oze's need to punish everyone who so much as looks at Prince Zuko with less than complete funning. Killing the Avatar might not be the best idea, given what we're hearing about the spirit problems in the Earth Kingdom. We don't want the same thing here in the Fire Nation. And according to the report I saw, this attack was sloppy. A village was endangered, Governor Hidge injured, and the targets all escaped. That is not the type of activity that will be tolerated by the Fire Lord, and it could turn other powers against us. Azula scowled. She didn't like to hear criticism about father. But what Piandao said was logical. But father was always right. But Azula couldn't think of how Piandao was wrong. So, clearly, both Piandao and Azula were not wise enough to see how father was, in fact, perfectly correct about the matter. Then what was the point of even discussing the matter of saving Zuzu from his stupid desire to fight an Agni Kai? If they weren't smart enough to do anything by themselves. Azula realized that Piandao was staring at her with one of those calculating expressions. She snapped her fingers. We're getting off topic. Well, even the disciple of the third eye might find Lady Geralt a tough target. Piandao looked down at the lamp in his hands. Her eyes work fine, but she's worn that blindfold for decades. It's allowed her to develop her fire bending so that she can sense all heat around her, and even manipulate it to a certain degree. Again, I think she'd probably lose such a match, but it would not be sure, and it would not be quick. If you could even get in touch with that brute so quickly. However, Piandao abruptly quieted, staring off into the shadows and stroking his goatee. Yes. Well, you're thinking of brute force methods. Prince Jose favors them, but maybe we can do something more subtle. Just as the disciple did yesterday, Lady Geralt once did some kind of favor for your father maybe half a year after Zuko was banished, although I don't know the nature. Perhaps she can simply be ordered to forfeit, or blackmailed. Unless she's already doing this on someone's orders. Well, yes, unless that. So, father once made use of Lady Geralt as well? Odd that Angela hadn't known when she had been part of arranging the hit with the disciple of the third eye. But Piandao was aware, even if he didn't have the details. Unless Piandao was lying, but no, he was terrible with falsehoods. He could avoid saying things like a professional, but he could never get an active falsehood past Angela. So did father not completely trust her? But she always did everything he commanded. Yet, there were times she wasn't even allowed in father's suite, and she was never offered an explanation. She was stuck here, brainstorming with Piandao while father was locked away beyond her reach until morning. Angela's stomach hurt. We'll just have to be ready to give father all the options. See what kind of transportation you can arrange. Find out if your contacts know who might be controlling Geralt. I'll look into contacting the disciple again. If you think of anything else, send word to me. No one sleeps until we talk to father. Without waiting for acknowledgement, Angela turned and stalked back to her suite to get dressed. She would just have to prove to father that he could depend on her and trust her with his secrets. She had no doubt that she would succeed. Less than perfect was less than acceptable. Sokka was less than thrilled with how breakfast was going. He didn't like mornings in general, but when he did have to deal with them, he liked a mix of food and peacefulness. Silence was always good, but a nice conversation like describing dreams or planning the rest of the day could be a good way to get his brain loosened up and ready for a day of being the solitary logical thinker in the group. This morning, though, was not peaceful. He was eating his Fire Nation fruit bowl at a team meeting out in the atrium between their rooms in his mansion, seated on the edge of the fountain. He swatted Momo away from his fruit while Mai and Suki stared each other down in front of the fountain. "I can't believe you're going through with the Agni Kai," snarled Mai. Her participation in this chaos was especially hurtful, since she usually sided with Sokka in his hatred of mornings. Seated on Sokka's left, Zuko sighed. "Well," retorted Suki, "he wouldn't have to if all this stupidity with you weapons wasn't causing so much trouble." Where, oh where, was that calm and collected demeanor of a Kyoshi warrior? Seated on Sokka's right, Aang sighed. Out past Mai and Suki, Commander Zhao paced back and forth. Really, backing out of the Agni Kai would only have political repercussions. Zuko's banishment would still be over, and he'd still be a prince. See. Mai brushed at the long fringe hanging just short of her eyes. Zuko is just being stupid for sticking with this. Oh, now we're listening to Zhao. Suki snorted. He's our best friend all of the sudden. Hey. Mai pointed a finger straight in Suki's face like it was a knife. Maybe Mai thought it was. You were there when he lit my stomach on fire, remember? I'd gladly shove needles in his eyes, but for now I don't want Zuko to get himself killed. Suki batted Mai's finger out of the way. No one wants to see that, but screaming at him isn't going to do anything. You heard Zhao, things are all full of politics now. Your crazy weapon friends are getting everyone in trouble, and if Zuko backs out now, none of the people we need on our side will respect him. This is your fault. Zhao stroked his chin. Fault is beside the point, but it's true that everyone will think Prince Zuko a gutless worm. Still, as I always say, survival first and then reputation. It's kept me alive, so far. Mai and Suki ignored him, choosing instead to go back to expounding on Zuko's stupidity and cursing everyone who worked as a weapon, respectively. Sokka, Aang, and Zuko all sighed together. King Toph stomped over from where she had been sharing her breakfast with Appa and kicked the shin of Sokka's boot. Those two are just going to keep going at it. Either one of you stops them, or I stop them. Aang and Zuko both stood up, but Sokka popped a square of papaya into his mouth and yanked them both back down to the edge of the fountain. He stood up and went over to stand between Suki and Mai. When they paused in surprise, he said, "Before we decide who deserves to die for this whole situation, I have a question. What is an Agni Kai?" Everyone stared at him. Mai said, "We went over it last night. No. Best not to let anyone else build up talking momentum just yet." Everyone's been throwing the words around, and yes, context has made it clear that we're talking about a firebender duel of some kind, but some of us grew up with enough war in our lives that we didn't need to go inventing extra excuses to kill other people. What is an Agni Kai? Why don't we think Zuko's is likely to survive, and why is it such a big deal to give up on the whole thing that Zhao is the only one taking it seriously? Silence continued to reign. The best part was that it was an honest question. When Zuko had come back from his jaunt out to find his mother's grave or whatever, it was Suki who broke the news about Garel and this Agni Kai, but with everyone so tense after the Sparky Boom Man who had tried to kill Aang, Mai, Toph, and Governor Hij, there had been a dearth of things like rational discourse or helpful details. Finally, Zuko stood up. Good. He hadn't shouted all morning. He was on Sokka's mental approved list. An Agni Kai is, at the most basic level, a meeting between two firebenders governed by the spirit of fire. It takes the form of a combat trial. In the Fire Nation, a clear victory means a fight to the death, but the winner only needs to prove the opportunity to kill the loser. Death isn't actually required. Zhao harumphed. But choosing to spare the loser is a message itself. It could be that the victor is too weak to take the kill, or else he is insulting the loser by treating the kill as unnecessary. When I fight an Agni Kai with a subordinate over a contested demotion, it's actually expected that I let the loser live so that he can suffer the indignity. Everyone makes a big deal out of an Agni Kai, Mai took up. People actually think it's a way to resolve feuds, and that's about as tiresome as it sounds. When two firebenders are mad at each other, they of course need to prove to the world who's better, or just want to fight it out and don't want to be charged with criminal activity. Putting conditions on the outcome isn't unheard of, but it's not all that common. Which should tell you how pointless it is. Zuko shook his head. It's not just about legal murder. When conflicts of honor or loyalty arise, an Agni Kai is a way to test which side is most in balance with the element of fire. That's why only firebenders can duel. Those who can't firebend have their own culture of formal trials. Mai whirled a blade around her finger, and very loudly said nothing. Sokka decided not to pursue it. He turned to Zhao. And you said something about political messy stuff. Yes, tribal, I did. Your whole purpose for being in the Fire Nation is to forward Prince Iroha's plan. Prince Zuko is a needed part of that, but if he backs out of an Agni Kai challenge that he issued, it won't exactly improve his reputation. But he'll still be alive, and just having a representative of Prince Oze visibly supporting the Avatar is valuable enough by itself. Sokka nodded. Don't call me a tribal. Anyway, it sounds like an easy solution. Zuko drops out, and we get on with our lives of overthrowing tyrants and nearly getting blown up by weird people with metal arms. Toph pulled a finger out of her nose and examined the tip. Not that you got blown up yesterday. No, but I have a sad feeling it's just a matter of time. Zuko snapped his hands in a dismissal that left flame trailing through the air. No. I won't back down. I don't care if I'm risking my life. Even if information about my mother wasn't at stake, Garel burned down a village of our own people. Lives were lost. She needs to answer for that, or at least the person who gave her the order. Mai's hands tightened around her blade. Suki groaned. Zhao gave a laugh that was mostly a grunt. Sokka sensed that he was losing the crowd again. That's when Aang stood up. I understand. It's your duty as a prince to look after your family and homeland. Well, it was as good a lead-in as any. If there was one thing Sokka was clear on, Zuko was never going to back down no matter how much everyone screamed, so it was a matter of finding the least stinky path through the whole mess, a path that would get everyone calm again. Hey, Zhao, you're not busy today, right? What? I'm in charge of this whole group's security, tribal. I'm always busy. Sokka held up a finger. 1. That is a highly offensive term and I ask again that you not use it. He held up another finger. 2. If you don't, I'm going to hide a strawberry in your armor and send Momo to find it. He held up a third finger. 3. You're a big bad firebending master who's fought duels, aren't you? You should be giving Zuko tips, because you've somehow managed not to die despite how much everyone here had been hoping for it at times. You must be good at not dying. Me. Sure. Keeping Zuko alive is part of your security duties, right? Well, making with the securing. While Zhao stared, Sokka saw everyone else losing their tension. Suki said, I could teach some helpful footwork. Aang raised his hands. Appa, Momo, and I can cheer you on. Sokka clapped his hands. And I can finish my breakfast. Go, Team Avatar. Everyone was still talking as he went back over to the fountain and retrieved his fruit bowl. It was empty, and Momo was lying in it with an obviously full belly. Before Sokka could give a proper long-suffering sigh, a blueberry bounced off his head. He caught it before it could fall to the ground, and looked over where Toph was still sitting in the grass. She held up her own fruit bowl. I'm done anyway. You earned it, Chief. Well, how about that? Unlike poor Zuzu, Azula had no problem with just waiting around for something to happen provided, of course, that she knew something was indeed going to happen. She was currently kneeling in the foyer of Grandfather's Fire Lord Azulin's suite, waiting for her appointment. She was fairly certain a happening was about to go. It had been a busy morning. By the time Father was up and ready to receive visitors, Azula had a full presentation, complete with visuals she could hang from a stand, on the various options they had for saving Zuko from himself. As Piandao changed the various maps and blueprints displayed on the stand, Azula had gone through each option for either trying to reach Zenmatsu Island by sunset or organizing some kind of assault using local forces, including itemized lists of costs. Being able to provide such thorough information to Father was its own reward. And yet Father had chosen none of those options. You did an excellent job, Azula. You've obviously put much thought into this, and I'm proud of how hard you've worked to find a way to help your brother, he had said. But there was no pride in his face, just a tightness she hated to see. Yet I'm afraid that even the best of these options seem tenuous, and this Agni Kai isn't an isolated event. If we interfere with haste, we might be putting Zuko in even greater danger. As much as I ache to help him, we'll have to trust in his perseverance and prepare for what comes next. Azula had wanted to ask, with a deadpan tone, if she should go ahead and assume she'd be an only child by tomorrow, but the look on Father's face had stopped her. He was plainly worried. And Azula had failed to help. But Father was strong, and so he had stood up and said, we have to identify our enemies and break off their ability to influence events. And we need to bring Zuko back here as quickly as possible. That might bring us into conflict with Iroha's forces, so we need to prepare for that, as well. Piandao, we have much to discuss. Azula, you've been up for hours, forced to deal with this stressful situation without guidance, and I apologize for that. You should take a nap. You know you need the proper amount of sleep to stay healthy. On the one hand, it was nice to have Father acknowledge the sacrifices she had made for Zuzu. On the other hand, Azula had been dismissed while the grown UPS talked about important matters. She needed to do something to help. She needed to prove to Father that she could be included. She needed to find a challenge that would force herself to grow as a person, princess, and destroyer. So, naturally, she had gone straight to make an appointment to see the Fire Lord. And had waited. And waited. And waited. Grandfather was, presumably, a busy man. The door at the far end of the foyer finally slid open, and Azula looked to find a man walking into the room, followed by the old women Li and Lo. The man wore servant robes, revealing only the skin of his face and hands, but even that much was all covered in blood-red writing. The tattoos were very fine, and Azula recognized on his cheeks a portion of the text of the Nawafan Hnangsix specifically, the passage about how all other elements bow to fire, and even the bones of the earth can melt. Ah! This would be Mutant of Lower Husin, then. A weapon of the Fire Nation and grandfather's personal advisors. Well, even if she was being screened, at least she was being taken seriously. The old women kneeled down side by side across from Angela, while Mutant took a place standing at attention with his back to the far wall. The weapon was acting as a guard, then. Angela glanced around the room, and spotted several decorative pieces, a statue here, a vase there, and so on that could be made of stone, all potential ammunition for an earthbender. Yes, she was indeed being taken seriously. Li, Arlo, said, Princess Angela. Lo, Arlie, said, what brings you to the Fire Lord? Angela smiled. Oh, I just wanted to talk about this matter with Zuko. It's obvious that grandfather is behind drawing him into the Agni Kai, but honestly, all these complications are just making trouble for everyone. Wouldn't it be better to reach an accord so we can all get on with our lives? Li, or Lo, said, what makes you think Fire Lord Ajalon has anything to do with Zuko's duel? Lo, or Li, added, the prince has a history of burning in his own fuel. Ah, a reference to the hilarious friendly fire incident that got Zuko his scar and ended father's military career. These sycophants thought themselves so clever. Please, don't insult me. I'm not here to argue or deliver some kind of formal legal charge. I just wanted to ask what we can do to resolve this without further difficulty. There's little gain in continuing to antagonize each other, especially with so many weapons involved. Things could easily get out of hand. Li and Lo didn't so much as glance at each other, but Angela was sure that the twins would be on the same page. One of them, the one on the left, said, Prince Oze was the first to make use of weapons. The one on the right continued, he requested the service of Piandao when he resigned from the Fire Army. Checking his ambitions has led to escalation. Angela snorted. Please, you act like father is planning treason. Why bother when grandfather was so old that a stiff breeze would probably kill him? Considering uncle's plan for the Avatar, perhaps it even would be a stiff breeze. He just wants Zuko back, so that we can serve the Fire Nation as the royal family is supposed to, compared to traitors like Uncle Iroh. Li, or Lo, leaned forward. That is escalation, too. Assembling a stronger faction here in the capital, using the son who Oze burned and let be sent away. Lo, Arlie, leaned back. Since when does Prince Oze care for his son? The Fire Lord thinks it a falsehood meant to lead him astray. Angela concealed her surprise. She didn't know how to answer that. She couldn't explain how father had changed his mind about Zuko, how father had changed so much in general since the banishment. He became more verbal, more willing to offer praise for things other than achievement. He became interested in things besides strength and firebending. And he decided that he wanted Zuko back, safe and welcome. Or was it just part of father's plans? According to Piandao, there were things going on that even Angela didn't know. Could father's behavior be part of that? Was he manipulating everyone? Was he manipulating Angela? Well, if he was, then he surely had a good reason. Perhaps she wasn't strong or clever enough. She would have to prove herself, or allow herself to be destroyed in the attempt. It took a moment before Angela was confident enough to speak again. Then perhaps what is needed here in the palace is some de-escalation. Surely, a path can be negotiated where Zuko can return and the royal family as a whole grows in strength. Li and Lo both narrowed their eyes. The one on the right said, the return of Zuko would come with a considerable price. The one on the left added, the Fire Lord is eager to learn what you have that will entice. Angela shook her head. I am not here to work out a deal just yet. But it is good to know that the Fire Lord is open to such dash. Angela. The sound of father's voice jolted her spine like a fizzled attempt at lightning bending. She froze and tensed, her combat instincts coming into play, but the heavy sound of father's footsteps behind her cooled her inner fire. Father's hands clamped around her right arm and dragged her out of the room. He only let go when they were back out in the hall. Angela stumbled to her feet, she would meet the punishment that was sure to come with strength and obedience, and glanced around. There were the Crimson Guards in front of grandfather's door, of course, and some servants moving around on business. She wished they would all go away. The guards slid the doors to grandfather's suite shut as father whirled on her. Angela forced herself not to cringe. Then she saw father's expression. He wasn't mad. He looked terrified. He pulled her into a hug. "Are you all right? I came as soon as I learned where you were. What were you thinking?" Angela blinked. Talking while being hugged felt strange. And she didn't like how the guards and servants could see this. She whispered, "You said we had to prepare for what is going to come next for Zuko. Negotiating an end to hostilities with Fire Lord Agelan struck me as the most efficient course of action." Father leaned back so that she could see him smile. "You're such a good sister, trying to take care of Zuko like this, but you shouldn't have risked yourself." He lowered his voice and added, "Those old spider snakes are monsters. I don't want you anywhere near them." This was because father was worried about her? Did he think Angela so weak? Or was there more going on than Angela was aware? More than father didn't want her to know? Angela hated having these thoughts. But she knew she wouldn't be able to serve father properly until she managed to defeat her doubts. And, in the end, that was all she wanted, to be the best daughter in all of history. "Yes, father. It will be as you say." "Good." He finally let her out of the hug, but kept a hand on her back as he guided her back to his own suite in the palace. "I have some thoughts on how we can quickly get Zuko back here, once this business with the Agni Kai is done. I need your opinion on some aspects of the plan. Do you feel up to it?" Of course. She always did everything that her father commanded. Always. Sometimes, it seemed to Mai like she was the one who always got stuck cleaning up after all the stupid people in her life. Always. She leaned against one of the columns that formed the colonnade circling Governor Hij's whole mansion, watching the small stream of people headed for the large courtyard at the rear of the grounds. It was there that, in about half an hour, Zuko and Geralt would have their Agni Kai. The sun was dipping towards the horizon, and Hij's guests, the other outer island governors and staff members and whoever else was currently freeloading, were trading whispers as they hurried to get a good seat. At least they weren't smiling. The morons were smart enough to know that there wasn't going to be any good outcome to this particular Agni Kai. Even those who might immediately benefit from having either Zuko or Geralt shamed or worse could get rolled over in all the drama that was sure to follow. Said drama could even include a civil war, just because this was the Fire Nation. Finally, Mai spotted the person she was waiting for. It wasn't one of her friends, or even one of friend-adjacent allies who were part of this conspiracy of Prince Iroha's. No, those were all helping Zuko get ready in some form or another, right down to King Toph advising him that the key to winning a duel was to win, not lose. Mai had quietly excused herself from that, leaving it in Sokka's more or less capable hands to make sure Zuko was on time. And, yes, Mai was trusting Suki to manage things as well. She may not exactly like the Kyoshi rebel, but Suki was competent enough. No, Mai was waiting for Heihachi. And Heihachi was passing by, walking all by herself to the Agni Kai, none of the other weapons in sight. Geralt, of course, would be preparing for the fight, and it seemed that Bang Fei didn't feel the need to hang around with the others all the time. Smart of him. Mai straightened, went over to fall into step with Heihachi, and said, "If Zuko dies, I'm going to turn you into the world's tackiest pincushion." Tacky? Heihachi looked over with a frown. Black is the sacred color of the Blade Masters of Kilauea, the color of volcano glass. Volcanoes are what formed the islands of the whole homeland. They are our ancestors, in a way. Mai didn't feel the need to get into a theological argument about how elegant styling and a dash of color could enhance the impact of wearing black and that Heihachi looked a walking ink stain. "I'm serious. Your life is on the line with this Agni Kai. And what exactly would that accomplish? There's no need to make this personal. I was just doing my duty as a weapon of the Fire Nation. I am quite fond of Prince Zuko, but a weapon does not choose how a warrior chooses to use it. What makes you think this is personal?" Mai didn't even miss a step. "I am a weapon, too, and everyone knows I don't care about anything." Heihachi actually smiled. "Then why warn me? If retaliation against me is your duty, then giving me notice will only make it harder for you. A blade master of Kilauea thrives on long-term planning. Mai hadn't thought about that. Her thoughts had been wrapped up in the danger Zuko was in and how she was supposed to feel about it. The whole situation made her angry, but she couldn't identify the reason. Sure, Zuko was a necessary part of this whole conspiracy they were running with Iroh, and Aang believed that it was their best shot at starting to fix the world. But having that threatened shouldn't make Mai actively angry. The obvious answer, of course, was that she cared for Zuko on some level. That's why she got started on this whole mess, after all the way back in the South Pole. But then she formed a real friendship with Aang and Sokka, and later Suki, kind of, and Katara and now maybe even King Toph. And her reunion with Zuko had been terrible, leaving her disappointed in him and angry at how he'd changed. She could work with him for this scheme as long as he wasn't being a jerk, but she knew that her old attachment to him, whatever it was gone. So why was she angry? Was caring about people not something you could turn off once you started, even if you didn't particularly want to be a part of their lives anymore? Ugh, that would be the worst. Of course, Mai wasn't about to share that with a woman who lied and killed for a living. I'm telling you so that when you start looking over your shoulder every waking moment to see if I have a line of sight on you, your employers will be aware of just what a stupid mistake they made. And I'm telling you now on the off chance you can actually do something to stop this, as useless as you probably are. It's not like I had anything better to do. I hope that on some level I don't disappoint you. Mai stopped, and let Heihachi continue on to the courtyard. Stands had been erected for the audience to sit and observe, and the center of the space was staked off to form a field of battle. Zhao's guards were stationed around the courtyard, although there weren't a lot of them. Zhao was running low on soldiers after the attack of the disciple of the Third Eye. Would Iroh send more as reinforcements? Mai felt a wind whip at her clothes. She turned and found Aang coming in for a landing, his glider snapping back into a staff, just outside the colonnade. He trotted over to her. Was that Heihachi? The weapon who sent Zuko to Hirae? Mai nodded. Aang looked over at the makeshift arena, and then back at Mai. How come you were talking with her? Mai shrugged. Just preparing for the Agni Kai in my own way. Oh. Were you threatening her? Aang actually blushed. It's just that it seems like something you would do. Mai felt an absurd urge to smile, but successfully denied it. She didn't want to antagonize Aang like that. Yeah, I told her I'd kill her if Zuko dies. And yes, I was serious. I don't like when people go after my friends, or friend-adjacent allies. Knives are very good at hurting people back, and I'm very good at knives. Aang looked back over at where Zuko would soon be fighting an Agni Kai. I know not everyone thinks life is sacred or, sacred enough not to sometimes want to kill, but trying to hurt other people can hurt you, too. Look what Prince Zuko has gotten into. Mai blinked. But earlier you told him you understood why he had to do it. I do. But that doesn't mean I don't wish I could change the way he thinks. I just know I can't. But with you, he turned to her with eyes that seemed to be softer than even his disarming usual. I really don't want you to get hurt. And I know you can change if you really want to, even if it's hard and kind of messy. Wow. Quite the commitment he was asking of her. Mai shrugged. Well, we're on a path that's going to bring us against lots of different enemies. I have an aversion of getting hurt, myself, but I'd rather it be me getting hurt than my friends. And friend-adjacent allies. Aang sighed. Yeah. I understand that, too. And Mai knew he did. Come on, let's go give Zuko some last words of tiresome encouragement or whatever he thinks he wants from us. Zuko kneeled on the northern end of the Agni Kai grounds and prepared himself for a fight. He breathed and focused on the feel of the setting sun on the bare skin of his back and arms. He let the silk bolt resting on his shoulders remind him of his status as a recognized firebender warrior. He let his sister's words, the talk of strategy and strength she had imparted when training him to fight the Avatar, run through his head. But mostly, he tried to avoid thinking about how worried his friends and allies had looked when they wished him luck and let him go to his battlefield. Suki could barely even talk, she was so clamped down with, presumably, fear. But Zuko had to fight this duel. He had to avenge his mother's home village. He had to learn why Lady Geralt had been sent to make war on their homeland, and who had ordered such a thing. A gong was struck. The duel had begun. Zuko inhaled sharply and moved in a rising spin that brought him fully to his feet and gave him enough power and momentum to snap out a punch that blossomed with flame. It wasn't the most respectful or honorable way to begin a duel, but it was probably his only way to win. He had a brief glimpse of his opponent before the fire consumed his line of sight, and she had only begun to turn to face him. He noted that her arms, surprisingly solid for such an old woman, but not for a weapon of the Fire Nation, were still at her sides, and while she was wearing the typical female attire for an Agni Kai, she hadn't taken off her blindfold, that blood-red cloth with the character dragon painted on it. But for now Zuko could only see the fire, and he quickly slid to his right along the edge of the battlefield, hopeful that with flames between them, Geralt wouldn't be able to sense his body heat. A fireball like a comet came out of nowhere to explode on the ground at his feet. Zuko jumped away from the riot of sound and light and heat, wondering if the fireball had been crafted to be louder and more explosive so that Geralt could keep track of it, or perhaps flush Zuko out of hiding. No. Wait. The fire wasn't fading. Geralt must be maintaining it. A second explosion came from Zuko's other side, filling his world with fire. It was intimidating, but it hadn't come close to hitting him, and although these fires were being maintained as well, he had little to fear from them. Yes, even a firebender could be burned. His scar and missing eye were proof enough of that, but not if he worked to prevent it. A simple motion was all it would take to assume control of any flames that got too close, and then he could handle them without fear of injury. Just like Geralt was doing now as she advanced through her screen of flames. Zuko ducked to execute a sweeping kick that would send his own fire at her feet in a bid to turn her approach. But Geralt breathed and the flames around him grew, cutting her off from his sight. And Zuko was forced to roll clear as the flames shifted, undulating, and whipping around unpredictably. Zuko stood back up and raised his arms in preparation to defend himself from the growing flames, but then they suddenly drew back, only to pulse forward again in certain spots, and then those spots retreated back while others flared and the flares whipped around chaotically before dying to let other sources flow into the same space in the air. The fire undulated around him, and Zuko felt like he was trapped in a bag while unseen enemies on all sides beat on it with fists and sticks. How could anyone be controlling this with any level of precision? It was too chaotic. His whole world was flames and already he could feel them searing the skin on his arms and shoulders and back and chest and. Geralt burst out of the fire, twisting and ducking to avoid her own conflagration. Zuko quickly punched a fireball at her, but she whirled just enough to avoid it and continued in her approach, moving quickly despite having to avoid the twisting and lashing inferno. The Avatar. She was moving almost like the Avatar, quick on her feet and holding her body in a way that let her turn in an instant while still maintaining full control. It wasn't quite Aang's style. Geralt wasn't holding a solid stance, instead almost weaving like a drunk in a way that would have looked sloppy if not for the fact that every movement kept her just out of the dangerous reach of another flame. She could see. Or something like it. Zuko realized that she wasn't controlling the conflagration. She had unleashed the full fury and unpredictability of fire, and she was somehow seeing or sensing each bit of the flames, and reacting to them. He also realized just how in over his head he was here. As Geralt approached, Zuko decided that his only hope was to end this as quickly as possible. He jumped at Geralt, summoning his inner fire to his left foot and snapping out a kick that would. Geralt leaned forward, catching his foot with her right hand even before he could build up any flame, and pushed with just enough force to make him land in a backwards stumble. A gout of flame lashed at his back, and Zuko couldn't stop himself from crying out. An open palm smacked against his head, spinning him around, and he couldn't keep his balance and he felt a new heat covering his sweating body. Flames stabbed at the skin of his bare feet. He screamed. He fell. Fire all around him. Had to find Geralt. Didn't even know where he himself was on the battlefield. Too bad he wasn't fighting her in the rain again. Pain on his arm. Another whip of fire. Roll away. Hands. His hands were in the flames. He couldn't win. He couldn't survive. Forfeit the match. Too busy screaming to find the words. Help. Enough. Enough. Wait. Someone was screaming, enough. An explosion of cool air washed over Zuko, dampening his pain for a blissful moment, and he beheld a brief image of a blue glow that was at once searing and comforting, a glow in the shape of an arrow pointing down to two eyes narrowed in anger. And then everything went dark. Aang couldn't not intervene. As soon as he saw Zuko disappear into that storm of flame, and heard the cries of anguish echoing across the courtyard, fear pierced his heart. It was fear for Zuko, yes, and also fear for what Maya would be forced to do if the prince didn't survive. The fear lanced deep enough to carve a path straight into the deepest parts of his self. And in those deep parts, Aang's past lives could be found. It was Avatar Roku who screamed a denial of Zuko's suffering, and in that moment, Aang agreed completely. He didn't want to see anyone hurt, not Zuko or Mai or Sokka or Suki or anyone. Yes, he had struggled with hate for Zuko, when he thought Zuko's sister might have killed Appa, and he remembered all too vividly the ambush on Crescent Island. But even hate wasn't enough for Aang to want someone to get hurt. He didn't need a plan or any fancy tricks. Roku provided the power, and all Aang had to do was slam his hands together and imagine the winds that used to blanket the southern air temple. With the full force of the avatars of the past behind it, the result was an explosion or air that knocked everyone in the courtyard to the ground and strangled the fire. Then Aang leaped out over the battlefield, riding the winds to a landing right beside Zuko. The prince didn't move from the ground, and the skin of his bare torso was red and ragged and wet. The sight shocked Aang straight out of the avatar state, and he was left as just the last airbender, the center of attention at a well-attended Fire Nation death duel. The whole courtyard was silent except for Zuko's ragged breathing. Then Lady Geralt crawled forward, lowering her head into a kowtow. I accept the Avatar's declaration of the Agni Kai's conclusion. I decline the opportunity to take further action against my challenger. Aang blinked. That was convenient. He heard footsteps behind him, and turned to see Suki running over to Zuko, leading a man and woman who were carrying bags of supplies. They kneeled around the fallen prince, and as they began to work, Aang realized they were healers. Maybe Zuko would be alright, and they'd avoided disaster and all kinds of bad things. Sure, it wasn't good for Zuko that he had lost, but is this what we're being asked to support? The call was loud and dripping with anger. Aang looked to the audience, and found one man, the governor of Hantano Island. Aang remembered from the welcoming ceremony and introductions standing. The old man looked around at the other spectators scattered and knocked down by the wind blast. Even if we take the Avatar's action as legal, is this who we're to count on to save the Fire Nation? A boy who doesn't have the strength to control his power? A child who will fly into a glowing cursed rage whenever one of his friends is hurt? Aang shrugged. Well, who doesn't want to help their friends? Apparently, a lot of Fire Nation big shots, because the various governors, politicians, and important people all looked less than convinced as they untangled themselves from the stands. One woman in some fancy clothes said, he couldn't even protect Governor Hidge, despite his power. At least we know the limits of the Fire Lord's strength. Another voice added, and the Fire Army is exploring those new metals for use in the colonies. My esteemed countryman, Lord Zhao interrupted, hurrying over from where he had been observing with the guards. He was still straightening his robes as his steady voice carried clearly over the courtyard. I heartily encourage discussion about the opportunities available to you, but this is not the place. A glorious Agni Kai has been fought here, and as unorthodox as it may have ended, we should respect that. The governor's staff tells me that dinners will be available to be served in your rooms, soon, and it will be much more comfortable to meet in smaller, more orderly groups. Please, let us retire from this place with respect and decorum. Aang heard some grumbling from the spectators, but it quickly faded and they all began leaving, filing out of the courtyard and into the colonnade that would lead them back to their rooms. He glanced back and saw that Zuko was being carried away on a stretcher, observed by Lady Geralt, but before Aang returned to his friends, he hurried over to Lord Zhao. Thanks for that. It seemed like it was about to get ugly. Zhao the younger approached from behind Aang, and it seemed like he was sneering less than usual. Yes, father, that was well done. It seems that you are not completely compromised. Lord Zhao's face was as expressionless as Mai's usually was. I have my own ties, but I am still responsible for organizing this gathering, and I will not accept a riot on the field of an Agni Kai. Thank you both for your appreciation, but if I may be so bold as to offer a bit of insight, you have much more important things to worry about. Commander Zhao nodded. True. At this rate, we're going to have the leadership of the Fire Nation completely turn against us, and I'd say we're about a week out from the first assassination attempts from the governors. I dread the report I'm going to have to make to my commanding officer. Aang knew that the younger Zhao was referring to Prince Iroh. By saving Zuko, had he completely messed up his whole reason for coming to the Fire Nation? To the point that more people were now going to try to kill him and his friends. Oops. Check the description for the links to the author.